I quote my dad a lot now, and often as soon as I've quoted him, I think like, I don't know if Dad really said that or if that's just something he taught us and I put it into the words. But for instance, when we were growing up, eating at the table, we didn't leave the table without first thanking Mom for the meal and then asking to be excused. And if you left without doing those two things, you got called back to the table. And then you would sit there until everybody was done. As a kid, that's just, it chafed a little bit, you know? But realizing later that what that did is that taught us to be thankful that somebody took time to prepare something for us, and it taught us gratitude. I tell kids at church, often they call Mr. Mark, right? Now, it's after about the second or third time I go like, okay, I'm okay if you call me Mark. I'm okay with that. However, you have to do what your parents say. So if your parents want you to call me Mr. something, Mr. Mark is fine. You call me Mr. Baublet, Mr. Mark. You can call me Mr. Denise if you want, which is always good for a laugh. I teach second and third or 2 and 3 year olds, so it's always good for a laugh.
Yeah.
So now occasionally in church, I'll be in the lobby and somebody will run up and go, hey, Miss Mark, and run off, and their parents will start to correct them. I'm like, no, that's my fault. So
that's funny. Yeah, kind of a good relationship with the kids, but it is about respect, though.
It is, and I always I tell teenagers that too. We used to teach a teenager class, and I would tell them the same thing. Like, I appreciate you being respectful, and you have to obey your parents, but I'm okay if you call me Mark.
Yeah.
I said, and then they would call me Mr. Baublet, and that was weird because my dad was a preacher, and so I never heard him called Mr. Baublet. It was always Pastor Baublet or Brother Baublet.
Yeah.
Something like that.
That's a mouthful.
And the men in our church we referred to the men in our church as Brother Harold, Brother Singleton, Brother Johnson, something like that. So Mr. was never really part of my vocabulary.
Yeah. Did the same thing growing up at our church too. So it's like most of the people I'm around now who call me brother are like biker type folks, or they're like, hey brother, how you doing, Randall? And but for me, like I have a hard time calling someone brother because like all I can think are those very religious, charismatic days.
Yeah,
it was a cult too.
But that was we'll
the tell way, that story some other time.
We grew up, and brother and sister was everybody.
Yeah,
it's just the old ladies in the church that I grew up in, they referred to themselves as widow ladies. Old widow ladies, they were all, I wonder now how old they really were, because when you're a kid, everybody's old.
Yeah.
But now I knew some of them as I was a young adult, and they were in their 80s and 90s. So really when I was a kid, they were still, 50, 60, 70. But they had, these were people that were raising their kids during the Depression.
Yeah.
So they were old.
Yeah. But, you can get up on that mic.
Get up there.
Fist away.
Oh, yeah.
Fist away.
A fist away.
You're a sound guy.
I'm a singer. I should have known that, right?
No, so these are condensers.
Yeah.
So they pick up pretty decent. Yeah. But yeah.
Yeah, but the old widow ladies in our church are always, Sister Noble, Sister Power, Sister, So then as an adult, when we went to a church where they didn't call everybody brother or sister, I always felt like I was sort of the anomaly in the crowd. Because
how come we don't do that at our church? No.
I don't know. I don't know if Mosaic, Oak Grove didn't really do that much, except for the older generation, like a generation older than me. A few of them did.
But they were like pretty traditional Baptists,
yeah, they were kind of traditional Baptists, but they were still Mr. and Mrs. Now, a lot of the old ones that I knew in the Oak Grove group were professors from school, so most of them were doctor.
Oh, gotcha.
So, and then after you got to know them a little bit, they would correct you, and they wouldn't let you call them doctor. So like, if you were my student, you would have to call me that, but you can just call me Ron, or something. The only one I ever had trouble with was Terry Box. I still call him Dr. Box. Never had him as a professor, but it was just something about him was different in the demeanor. We've been friends for almost 30 years now, but he's still, when I address him, it comes out as Dr. Box. And he's like, dude, I've been retired 20 years. You can quit calling me that.
Still a doctor.
You still earned it.
Exactly. Still earned it.
It's a lot of work to get that in there.
Thank you for the coffee, Ben.
Yep.
How you doing?
Yes, thank you.
Doing good, man. It's gonna be a good week.
Good week.
It's gonna be a good week.
The week's almost over.
It's Thursday.
So, are you still counting on a good week, or has it been a good week?
Well, see, here's the deal. So we're going on an anniversary trip this weekend to Hot Springs, and so just to make it to a Thursday, is just, biting at the bit. It's going to be a good week, right? I still count the weekend as part of this week.
Mm.
How many anniversaries is this?
16.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. You've almost started.
How long have you been married?
44.
44. That's pretty good. So yeah,
and that's the straight answer. Again,
answer.
I never met a straight answer. I couldn't work my way around.
Yeah.
I used to tell everybody. I would say, well, I've been happily married 41 years, and out of 44, that's a good average. Denise is not a fan of that joke.
No, I can imagine that.
But again, she says, I say, yeah, but those other 3 years were, let's see, 41, 40, and 36 years ago.
Mm.
So, those years with a new baby in the house are a little stressful. So
there right now.
Yeah.
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 So,
you are. I like your little baby though.
He's pretty cool.
He's fun.
He
and I played together for a while when on Wednesday nights. And now whenever I walk in, I'll speak to him, and he's gotten where he's recognizing people, and you get some reaction from him when you call him by name. So it's kind of fun.
Yeah, and we haven't found anyone that he won't smile at yet. Yeah. So whereas like our second daughter, or our first daughter, second child, she like hated everyone, including me. Like for the first 18 months, the only one who could hold her without screaming was really my wife. And other than that, like I could hold her a little bit, but everybody else was a no-go. And you know her. Like,
I know, she's the side-eye girl.
She scowls at you. Like everyone. She scowls. She used to. She's better now. She kind of gives a weird face, but...
Yeah, I tell her now, like, I'm going to keep talking to you till you answer. You might as well just... Yeah. It's on you now. So
my wife's gone to a phase now where like when she's like kind of getting ornery or something, she'll just say, I love you too.
That's funny.
Yeah, I love you too.
It's funny how unique all their personalities are.
Yeah.
You're 5 for sure. I don't know Ben's girls quite as well, but because they're a little older, so I don't have
they're in the youth.
The teenager group
they're
now.
in the youth. So
it's a little bit different animal when you get to that group.
Yeah, it is.
I had 2 teenage girls in my family, so I pray for Ben a lot. So.
Yeah.
Thank you. We'll
have 2 eventually.
Yeah.
Although, actually, no, you're right. Like my wife, Katie, she's always like, she wants more boys rather than girls because the girls are so dramatic. Mm-hmm. Like, no offense to girls, but those are her words. Like, I kind of like it. Like with the last one, I'm like, I kind of wanted a girl.
Yeah.
I wanted a girl more than ended up being a boy, and he's pretty cool. But yeah, the girls are more dramatic. Now, our oldest boy, he's starting to kind of hit a little bit of a angsty teenager phase, and he's only 11.
I was going to say, he's 11 or 12.
But he's hitting it.
Yeah.
We'll survive. We'll get through.
Yeah, it's one of my favorite. Denise and I were around kids a lot when we were growing up and as young teenagers stuff. When we got married, we worked with the children in our church. And but we were the last in our group to have children, to the point that people were starting to worry there was something wrong. Like, no, we're going to take our time, But we would tell people all the time. I said, you have kids, and so we tried to read and study a little bit, and watch what other people were doing with their kids. And one of the authors we read a lot was Dr. James Dobson. Wrote a lot of books on raising children, stuff like that. And he used to say all the time,
on the family.
No matter how good a parent you are, you're going to screw your kids up somehow. So that's why you pray. I thought, and at the time, first time I ever heard him say that, I thought, well, for a psychologist guy, that doesn't seem like good advice. But I understand it a lot better now.
Yeah. So. One thing, like from growing up with parents who, I don't know how to put that, but like I know I one lesson I learned is like don't put yourself on a pedestal in regard to your kids. Like don't, and this it comes from a lot of different places, but if you put yourself on that pedestal where you do no wrong as a parent and can't be questioned, and then eventually your kids are going to figure out that this person doesn't have it all figured out either,
right?
And then you kind of like you fall from grace pretty hard, and it's hard to recover from that.
Yeah. Yeah, we did. I think we did pretty good with that with our kids. We tried to raise them to be, we would always be straight with them. Every question deserves an answer. Of the things I was never going to do as a parent, one of them was I was never going to use the answer because I said so. Because my parents didn't do that a lot, but it always irked when they did.
Even after they ask you for the 5th time and you've given them a straight answer.
Yeah. I said, I was like, I'm going to give you an answer. It may not be an answer you like, but it's, I'm going to try and give you an answer,
Yeah.
And sometimes it's because yesterday you just had to have this shirt. So that's why you're wearing this shirt.
Yeah.
But we talked a lot growing up with our kids, choices have consequences.
Got that right.
That's it's not phrased like that in the Bible, but there's a whole lot of that in the Bible,
Yeah. Got you.
Yeah. So that was good too. And my parents were pretty good about that. My dad was a preacher, pretty much all my life.
So was mine.
And mom was a believer when they met. And so we grew up in church, like I think I tell you I was going to church before I was born, so it's just always been part of life.
Yeah.
But Dad was pretty good about giving us reasons for things when we had questions. He would tell us something and expect us to do it. But if we questioned afterwards, then he would go back and explain it to us. And so my brothers and I had kind of learned that was a pattern with Dad. Do it, then ask why, instead of asking why first.
How many siblings?
I have two younger brothers.
2 younger brothers, so 3 of you?
Yeah, three boys. So raising girls was interesting. So I was glad Luke came along first because I was kind of used to boys. So that worked out. And then 2 girls after that. So
what's it like being raised by a preacher?
I couldn't imagine a better way to grow up. My parents sort of broke trends in their families. My mom was from England. She was a pediatric nurse. Met a young American airman at a church service, and dated for a little while, fell in love, and moved to the States with him. He knew at the time he was going to be a preacher. That God had called him to do that when he got out of the service. And he grew up in Indiana, and so my mom moved across the world, and my dad moved from Indiana to Texas, which is virtually across the world culturally.
Sure.
So, he grew up on a farm family.
Both country.
Yeah. He grew up on a farm on a farm family. Was one of 8 kids. And
good size.
So he came from a good sized family. We ended up in Nacogdoches in 1964, I guess. Dad came here to preach. And after he'd finished up his Bible college training while we were living in Houston, so they had 3 children in 4 years in 3 different states. And mom was still, we always say mom was still learning the language. So just trying to get used to what's it like to be in first Indiana, then Missouri, then Texas, and then raise teenage boys.
Yeah. How was their accent? Did she have a decent accent?
In talking to mom, she didn't have an accent, but people, even the last year before she passed away, people would say, "Oh, we just love hearing your mom talk." And so that's because she didn't raise you. That's why. It was just mom to us. On the phone, you could hear it.
Yeah.
And then after we all left home, mom and dad were able to go back to England and visit a little more often. Expense-wise, things had changed. And we would always laugh that whenever mom came back from England, or if she had family that came over here, she picked that accent back up again. It's like, Mom, you just got off the boat. We don't understand anything you're saying anymore.
Yeah. Did you picking up any of that accent growing up?
We didn't pick it up, but we learned to speak properly.
Okay.
Grammar was important. I knew which side of the plate you put the fork and the spoon on.
Okay.
We ate meals at the table. So there's a lot of British habits.
Where else do you eat meals?
As opposed to sitting on the floor, everybody just kind of wandering in, getting a plate and wandering out.
In front of the TV.
Yeah. We ate 3 meals a day at the table. It's funny, I guess growing up I don't know if it's so much that Dad was a preacher or not, but just in the way they raised us that I quote my dad a lot now. And often, as soon as I've quoted him, I think I don't know if Dad really said that or if that's just something he taught us and I put it into the words. But for instance, when we were growing up, eating at the table, we didn't leave the table without first thanking Mom for the meal and then asking to be excused. And if you left without doing those 2 things, you got called back to the table. And then you would sit there until everybody was done and then do those 2 things. And as a kid, that's just, it chafed a little bit, but realizing later that what that did is that taught us to be thankful that somebody took time to prepare something for us. and it taught us gratitude, to express gratitude. And I can remember as a teenager saying to Dad, you always make us tell Mom thank you before we leave the table. And he goes, yeah. I said, but if we say it, we don't really mean it. Is that doing any good for anything? And he goes, like, you're building a habit.
Mm-hmm.
And one day that habit will mean something to you.
Yeah. For sure.
So not a bad thing to have in your lifestyle to be thankful.
Yeah, just because you're running the track and don't understand it and maybe begrudge it doesn't mean that someday you'll get it.
Yeah.
Especially when you have kids of your own.
Yeah, exactly. I say thank you to, waitresses and the checkout girl at Kroger's and stuff like that. It's an ingrained thing to be thankful for. And it's not a bad thing to incorporate into your lifestyle, to be grateful for things.
No, manners show other people how you care about the world and them.
Yeah.
It's your way of being.
If I have sometimes wondered if that my son and I talk sometimes about that his generation seems to struggle with anxiety more than my generation did.
Mm-hmm.
And the reasons for that, I'm sure, are varied. But
I'd like to know because I think about it a lot.
Yeah.
So yours, how old's your son?
He's 41. So
41,
he's like close to you guys, I guess. Yeah,
so I'm 36. Ben's 36.
Yeah,
so
in the same age.
Yeah.
My baby just turned 36 this year.
Okay,
so just last week. So
okay,
that's a little weird to do, but
it's
yeah.
We're the youngest we'll ever be.
My oldest turned 40, this year, and I'm like, well, it's not his fault he's young. But I have Luke and I have talked about the fact sometimes I wondered that if one of the reasons why is the gross generalizations here, but my generation did a lot more. I think gratitude and thankfulness was a bigger normal part of our life because there wasn't instant gratification. And so generally, you had to work for something.
Yeah, I think
so. Then being grateful for that, I think, is a good counter to anxiety. Because to me, anxiety comes because you're worried about, are you going to be able to get something done? Are you going to be able to accomplish something? Worry creates anxiety.
It's fear.
Yeah.
Anxiety is just another word for fear.
Yeah. So I think that being thankful sometimes is a good.
Yeah. I think it helps.
I don't have the house I wanted, but I've woken up under a roof every day of my life.
Yeah.
Sometimes the houses weren't much, but
in America, like, you're living in the top 1%.
Yeah.
Even if you're below the poverty line, you're living in the top 1% of the world.
Oh yeah, no doubt.
Yeah. So, but I don't know, the anxiety thing. It's like there's a lot of anxiety in millennials in my generation, and I think a lot of it comes from. There's probably a portion that comes from a lot of latchkey kids. People not being there for them, and then also parents moving a lot of obstacles out of your way, so that you didn't face the same kind of hardship or work. Like, how old were you when you got your first job?
16.
16.
Yeah.
What were you doing?
I graduated from high school at 17. So, 16. When I was 15 and 16, I worked for a house painter during the summers.
Okay.
And then after school. And then when I was 17, I got a job working in a restaurant. I started cooking in restaurants and did that for a couple of years. But basically I took on I guess my first 40 hours scheduled work. I was 17 years old.
Yeah.
Working in restaurants. And I could never understood, even then I could never understood the other people in restaurants. Like, they always wanted to get off early, but then they always complain about not having any money. I'm like, it's a direct relationship between the number of hours you're working.
Yeah.
I
think also my generation was all of them were told to go to college. And then you have these degrees. What is it, like 50% of people, less than 50% of people use their degrees for what they actually
You're working a different field than their degrees in.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then also inflation, housing costs, like, so much has gone up and changed over the years. Like, wages have not kept up with inflation.
Yeah.
And costs have.
It would be tough obviously. Now. Denise and I have talked about that a lot, that it would be,
So that's anxiety.
The work that we've done in our church that we've been able to do, over the years, we've been in contact with people. And I've told Denise, like, I don't know how some of these people make it. Single moms and single dads.
Yeah, I know. That too.
Just, one income families. It's virtually non-existent anymore.
Well, and you also have the 2-income trap too, where both parents are working and the kids are in daycare, and most of one of the parents' salary goes to covering daycare.
Yeah. Yeah. When we rolled into three children family, we discovered that was happening. And so, Denise, had stopped going to college and said, okay, let's get our kids big enough to go to school, then you'll go back and finish. Should go back and finish. But she actually started keeping kids at home. And in the state of Texas, you can register as a home daycare without having to meet daycare. It's a different set of licensing standards. Fewer number of kids, but you could, you had to meet certain standards. But then you could advertise as that. And she had to prepare a meal plan every week, stuff like that. So we thought, well, if she kept our kids at home, and if she kept 3 or 4 other kids, particularly the target was to keep teachers' kids, because then your summer vacations and holidays and things like that would match up. And so she ended up, she advertised up at the college, just put up, notices on bulletin boards around campus, that she was available to keep kids. And so she did that for 2 or 3 years, kept several people's children that were young and, up through about first grade.
Yeah.
And so she was able to stay home, and then, she didn't make a lot of money doing that, but like you said, her whole salary was going to daycare. And this way she was home with the kids and bringing in a little extra.
Yeah.
So that worked out good.
I don't know.
And then when our kids got big enough to go back to school, she went back and finished college and finished her accounting degree.
Okay.
So she's a proud SFA alumni, and I'm a proud SFA dropout.
Nice.
I had a lot of college hours and no degree, but I've got a well-rounded education.
What'd you drop out for?
I liked learning, but I was not a good student.
I can relate.
I liked going to class, and I'd go like, what's the last day I can drop the class? So I had a lot of classes, unfortunately, that did that.
What were you
with? I started with biology and then switched to chemistry, because I thought, okay, chemistry's a little farther down the chain than biology, like work my way back into the Big Bang somehow. And I did biology for a little while and dropped out for a couple of years, and I went back and started in computer science and accounting. So I had 200 and 300 level courses, in 4 different majors, and that was I know a little bit about a lot of stuff.
Jack of all trades.
Learn a lot of stuff, do a lot of stuff. I was working a job, and I started on a midnight shift. That shift closed down. We moved to second shift. All the college students moved to second shift, 3 to midnight shift. And there was an opportunity to go to day shift and be a supervisor, and I applied for it and got that. And so then it came with a substantial raise. And that was about the same time we were deciding that Denise should not work out. So, making a little extra money and working. And I worked for that company for 27 years.
What were you doing?
I worked at Ford Travel.
Okay.
Here in town.
Nice.
Started out building cabinets.
Yeah.
Supervised a cabinet shop for a lot of years, and then I got a corporate level job as like a corporate trainer, and I worked with the different departments on setting up ways to track what they were doing and find ways to improve their process. And I traveled for the company some. We had stores around the country where we sold motorhomes, so I do employee training and things like that. So got to do some traveling.
Yeah. You enjoy that?
Kind of fun. Yeah, it was fun. It was fun building stuff, so.
Yeah.
I remember I told my dad I got a job building cabinets, and he laughed, and he said to me, you failed Tinker Toys in kindergarten. You should be interested. So thanks, Dad.
So can you build a motorhome now? You know how to build them?
Yeah, it would probably come back to me, muscle memory.
It's like riding a bicycle.
Yeah, it's like
build motorhomes.
Yeah. It was fun. It's a good job.
What's the best motorhome to get?
It depends on, it's like most things, it's a budget driven thing. Like when I left Ford Travel, we were selling $750 motorhomes.
$750
each.
Not $1,000?
$750,000.
$1,000, yeah.
Yeah.
Say, I'll buy one for $750.
$750. When I started at Ford Travel, we were making motorhomes that were, $20,000 to $25,000, which was still really expensive. This was like in the late 70s.
Yeah.
But Mr. Ford decided to, I'd rather sell fewer for more money. That way we can get into a different market.
So they just went more luxury.
Into like a luxury Class A type motorhome.
So what makes them so expensive?
Parts, what you put in them. We pretty much, we built the motorhome from the ground up. We built our own chassis. We did all of our own fiberglass work. So it was pretty labor intensive. And there was, it was a nice markup in them. But it was also really good. We put flat screen TVs in motorhomes before anybody else was putting flat screen TVs in motorhomes, and just, lots of things like that to try and make them a little more luxurious. So it would be we sold to a lot of people who owned their own businesses, you know, and it was kind of a status symbol kind of thing.
I know a lot of like in the entertainment industry. I think Ford Travel does get used a lot too for star buses and stuff like that.
A lot of those. We used to see them every now and then in TV shows about making TV shows and movies.
Exactly. Yeah.
You know more about that than I do.
Yeah.
But occasionally they'd be like on the lot where everybody was living while they filmed it. There'd be a Ford Travel in that mix.
Exactly.
That's kind of cool. It's one of ours.
Yeah, they're at the higher end.
So that's pretty nice stuff. So, but it was fun.
Did you need you didn't need your college education for that job?
Well, you know, and you learn in college. Did it
help? Like,
I guess
help. But the diploma didn't get you the job.
The diploma didn't get me a job, so I didn't really need a diploma. So I think that's why at some point we kind of thought maybe when Denise finished her degree, then I'd go back and get mine. And by that point, I was like, I'm in my late 30s. Am I going to use this degree for anything?
Yeah,
you know, not likely. You know. I finished my work career. I retired last year from working. And I'd been working for Elliott Electric Supply in their corporate office here in town. I worked in the credit department, so I worked on a computer and a phone, built spreadsheets with customers and tracked finances, and set up accounts for people, and did background checks on things like that. You know, so you know the computer stuff I learned in school. What was the thing I saw on the news the other day? Oh, they were talking about the Doge stuff going on in Washington. And said like, you know, the IRS systems are still using COBOL-based programming. I'm like, well, I know what COBOL is.
I don't know what that.
Like nobody in your generation and younger probably would have trained in that.
Was it good stuff?
It was good at the time. You know, it was a computer language. You know, it was my first computer class in school. We had to write a program on punch cards. Because they said to us, you could graduate and go to work for a company that still uses these instead of the big reel tapes and stuff like that. That were like, you know, remember now, there's more stuff on my phone now than the computers I worked on in college.
Yeah. There's more power in.
Yeah, it's crazy.
I don't know what the ratio is, but like compared to like the computer that brought them to the moon. If you're one of those people that believes that, I don't know. I'm like, I think it's just funny. I think the whole thing's funny, like whether they made it or not.
I was wondering, are filmmakers more inclined to think that those are all fake pictures?
I think the majority of people believe it. Like I know a lot of people who don't, and I'm just like, what difference does it?
I don't know if they did it or not, but I remember sitting watching it on TV, and my dad setting his camera to take pictures of it on the black and white TV in the back of the house.
I mean, as a filmmaker, the whole like Kubrick. There's the myth that Kubrick shot it. I don't know. Ben might be more into this subject than.
I think it's a lot more serious than you guys are making it out to be.
Tell us. How serious is it?
Well, you're talking about.
You mean the conspiracy is more serious, or the real landing?
The largest deception to hit the world.
Sure. Yeah. Let's so say if they didn't land on the moon.
Now,
it's a lot of people to keep secrets.
It is a lot
to keep a secret.
It is, but you know. It could be done, I suppose. You have to keep the secret. The thing, that's why you kill everyone that, you know, can't keep their mouth shut or doesn't need to continue on.
So what's the joke now? I said it's, you know, people in this younger generation don't learn their history. Very few of them realize that Louis Armstrong never really stepped on the moon with his trumpet.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know, it's interesting. But the thing about computers, you know, I would work with I ended up somehow being the guy that in my department, if people had trouble with their computer, they would come to me, and if I couldn't fix it, I would call the IT group.
Okay.
And I would talk to the IT groups. I would call them and talk. You know, you call and you talk to IT. It's a different world. And I finally told a couple of them, I said, look, I can't do what you guys do, but I learned what caused your job to exist 20 years ago. In computer programming, even though the languages are different, the theory is still the same.
Okay.
Computers work off of an if, then, else sequence of questions. If A equals B, then C. Or if A equals D, then E.
Yeah.
That's how all computer programming is. That's how video games work. You click here and it causes something else to happen.
If this happens, do this.
Yeah. You know, and so if you can follow the logic of it, it's why you teach your kids. This is why you have to learn math in school. You may never need algebra or trig, but you've learned how to solve problems. Nobody's ever walked up to me and said, if I leave Chicago going south at 50 miles an hour and you leave Texas going north at 60, where will we meet in 6 hours? Nobody's ever asked me that, but I know how to figure that out. So when I go home and there's water in the floor because a pipe is leaking somewhere, I can figure out how to solve my problem.
If your water's traveling at 15 miles per hour in X direction, then
it must be coming from the bathroom.
Exactly. Yeah. Oh, so then you're not one of those parents who needs their kids to come figure your phone out for you, or do you got that?
I got a grandchild that does it.
Okay, so you still need to.
I can do the basics, but every now when my oldest grandchild is 17 now, but when he was younger and would come to the house sometimes when they still lived here, he would pick up my phone every now and then and go like, if you did this and this and this, it would work better for you. Like, oh, okay.
Yeah, and a lot of that, like, there's a lot of tricks I don't know.
Is usage.
You figure out, like, my wife the other day, I'm like, that if you press on the space bar while you're typing, if you're texting something, and you press the space bar and you move it, it'll move the...
moves the cursor.
Yeah, it'll move the cursor.
Is that not crazy?
Yeah, just back and forth.
I just learned that 2 days ago.
Yeah,
it's pretty handy.
Yeah, it's handy.
Yeah.
Luke, I think Jaden was the one that taught me I could double-click space bar to put a period in.
Oh, yeah, that one's been around for a while.
That's been around for a while, but if you don't know that,
I still hit the period. See, with you have an iPhone.
I have an
with
iPhone.
the Samsung, they put the period and the apostrophe are down there.
That's a bad word, y'all.
The one, I know, well, mostly with Ben. I'm like, again, ambivalent. Like, do what suits you. But one thing that made me not want an iPhone was when I'm texting, they don't have an apostrophe available with the letters. Right. So you have to click over to put apostrophes. And given I like grammar, I like putting my apostrophes in. Commas. Oh, sorry, commas is what I meant. I said I liked grammar, but then I don't know the right word.
It's a matter of height, right?
Yeah. The bottom one.
The bottom one. The Oxford one.
Yeah, the Oxford comma.
Yeah. I'm an Oxford comma guy.
Oh, me all the way. No.
Yeah. Yeah, when I discovered that you write, among other things that you do, I thought, this will be fun because, my best classes in school were English classes.
Okay.
I had the same teacher for 2.5 years, different classes. I wasn't failing, but, just somehow she moved with us as we moved through school.
Yeah.
But she wasn't real big on teaching grammar, but we read a lot and we wrote a lot. Okay. And we wrote about what we read a lot, and so while we got graded for grammar, it became more of we wrote enough to develop an ear. So you can hear. I still don't know that I can diagram a sentence or tell you what a prepositional phrase is, but if you end a sentence with a preposition, I will hear it.
Yeah.
So
that's an archaic rule. I think that rule needs to be
that rule is
tossed.
probably gone.
Yeah, we can. This is a long time ago. I looked at the history of that rule up, but it was pretty. It's a pretty old rule that was like kind of based in some nonsense, and we can end. We can end sentences with prepositions.
I had a friend give me my last job. One of the things that I would do is I would often proofread articles for the newsletter, company newsletter that came from my department. My coworkers would write it. They would give it to me to proofread, and then we'd give it to our boss to proofread before it went in. But they discovered they would run it through me. I would catch things, and so they didn't feel as silly to the boss sometimes. One of them gave me a book called Eats, Shoots, and Ladders. That's kind of the history of some of the stuff. I've got a copy of it on my shelf at home.
That's why the Oxford comma is important. Yeah. It's the other one. Let's eat grandma.
Yeah.
Yeah. But that's not an Oxford comma, but still they're important. No, there's something about in journalism, they don't want to use them. But then in all creative writing, you use them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it frustrates me when I read something without it now.
For anyone who wants to know, the Oxford comma is when you have a series of 3, you put a comma behind the second in the series. Whereas no Oxford comma is when you don't include that one. Right. Which you see a lot in journalism.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that one bothers me, and the use of the apostrophe in business names.
I've noticed that.
It's a plural when it's like a plural word, but they put an apostrophe in it, make it look like a
possessive.
It makes it look possessive when what they really just mean is a plural.
So they're using it wrong.
Yeah, they're using it wrong.
Yeah,
and I'm like,
plain old incorrect. Who does that?
I wish I could think of some examples now off the top of my head, but
let's go.
There are a lot of them.
Let's go boycott them.
Yeah, take that apostrophe out. That's not what you mean.
Yeah.
But again, some of that rolls back to mom's English grammar and my dad, because my dad spoke for a living and read a lot.
Yeah.
And they were both well read. When my dad was in the military, he was in the cryptology
Okay.
part of the Air Force. And that's all we ever knew about what he did, because he told us one time, my brothers and I, he said, I made a promise that I would never tell anybody what I did, and they never released me from it.
He's one of those.
Yeah, like, okay.
Was he in the
he was in the
World
Air
War II?
Force. He was in the Air Force during the Korean time.
Okay.
During the late 50s. He
MASH.
Yeah.
MASH.
So he was he was in the MASH unit in England. No, but he was stationed in England. But he I think, if I remember the story right, at 18 he hitchhiked to Indianapolis to find out what do you have to do to join the Air Force, and basically they signed him up and sent him to boot camp.
Yeah, B-18.
Yeah, B-18.
Tell us you're 18.
I have a picture of my dad at 18 in his Air Force uniform, and it's like the old kind of soft edges around and everything like that.
Yeah.
And it's weird to look at, because, like, I mean, do you think about your dad being 18? You know, can you imagine
There's
what he looked like?
There's a few pictures of him.
I mean, I have that picture. I know that's what he looked like, but when I look at that picture, like,
it doesn't match.
In my head, it doesn't match up.
Yeah.
And I have a picture of him on the boat going to England, leaning on the side rails with his, his uniform on and stuff like that, and it looks like old black and white movie pictures,
Yeah.
But that's what they had, was black and white camera. So
there were some color cameras back then.
Yeah. So he ended up in England and met mom at a church service, and they started dating. And a good English girl marrying an American soldier was still not well received in the English population at the time, because American soldiers were kind of
because we're the rebels, or
no, just Yankees. Those Yankees. My grandmother, my mom tells a story that as she and my dad were engaged, that she heard her mother, my grandmother, argue with a woman in a grocery store. And apparently this woman had said to my grandmother, "Oh, I understand your daughter's getting married to an American soldier. When is her baby due?" I was like, "That's not the way I raised my daughter." It's like, but that was kind of the assumption, that was the cause.
Yeah.
But
shotgun wedding.
Yeah, it wasn't a shotgun wedding.
Oh no, it's England. They don't have shotguns.
They don't have shotguns there.
Yeah.
Probably could have, but
no, they do. They do.
They
still have. They got some strict laws. Shotguns are one of the easier ones to get in England.
But Mom says that when she and Dad decided to get married, that the Air Force and various American government people interviewed her and her family, did background checks.
Well, given he's also
what he was doing, but her father had been career military with the British Army and had been stationed in India for a while during part of that whole colonial period of time, and had served in both World Wars.
Those were interesting times.
Yeah.
Like everything was turning over when the car was coming around, or the internal combustion engine, and steam power was going out. But there was just a lot of stuff changes. Like kind of like now, where this tumultuous change with AI. I'm not sure which is going to be bigger. Some are saying AI is going to be the biggest change in history.
Yeah, I don't know. AI for me is sort of where the moon landing conspiracy is for some people right now. I'm like, yeah.
Tell us about it. Tell us your hot take on AI.
I have no idea.
No idea?
No idea how that's going to work.
Has it touched your world?
I'm sure it has. I carry an iPhone in my pocket.
True.
And I use it to track myself on the bicycle, so that if I fall off, it will send a message to Denise.
It knows when you fall off?
Yeah.
Have you tried it? Have you tested that out?
I've tested falling. Does that part count? She's usually right behind me when I fall. Yeah. The only time she wasn't, the only major fall I had, she wasn't behind me, but I could reach my phone and call her and come get me. So, but yeah.
Yeah, you need one of those inflatable crash helmets. They when you hit they have like an accelerometer. And you hit the ground,
there's nothing like falling off a bike that will make you be careful about falling off a bike. Only had one major injury. I do have 2 bicycle helmets at home that have the paint scratched completely off them, where I finally quit moving.
Trophies.
When I hit the curb or hit a median or something like that. So
at least you had a helmet.
I had them on. Yeah,
It wasn't your head.
Yeah. And I have a friend who's like, helmet's not going to help you much if you get hit by a car. Like, nothing's going to help you if you get hit by a car.
Yeah.
But if you just fall off and you're rolling on the road.
Yeah.
Like
my kids, like, I make them wear helmets, and because where we live, the hills go up and down a bit, and like they'll just take off going down a hill. I don't mind so much like on a flat street where they're just kind of cruising around a little bit, not going fast. But they start going down those hills on a walk, they could take their dome out.
Yeah.
And they always say, but I don't do that. I've never done that. I've never crashed.
Yeah, but you can't put it on that fast.
And it's like, yeah, it's not for that you never have. It's that you might, and it could happen. And you never know. And then you do get to that because I said so. Sometimes you're like, I've told you multiple times why you need to wear the helmet.
Yeah, the closest I ever came to because you said so, I remember saying to one of the kids, I probably shouldn't specify, so they may see this. They'll know the story. I remember saying to one of my kids said to me, well, you just don't trust me. I said, it's not that I don't trust you, it's that you don't trust me. You don't trust me that as an adult, I might have a view of this potential problem that you don't have yet. So I'm asking you to trust me. I said, and if it turns out I was wrong, I'll come and tell you I was wrong.
Yeah.
Because again, I think that's an important thing too. As a parent, you have to be able to own up to your mistakes.
Of course.
Otherwise, your kids don't know how to do that. I had really good parents. Couldn't hardly. I used the expression one time to somebody that I grew up in a Leave It to Beaver family. Okay, you know the reference. Okay, I made the reference to somebody from Australia. Had no idea what that was. Like, what is that? They had no idea what the show was.
Yeah.
But parents who loved us and took care of us, and took care of the basic needs that we had. Yeah. So
classic American family. Beaver Cleaver.
Mom did not wear pearls while she cooked in the kitchen like Mrs. Cleaver. But because she was a poor preacher's wife. But no. But we had a good upbringing. Knew our parents loved us. I don't ever remember where I started to go with that. I don't ever remember hearing my parents argue as a child. As an adult now, I realize they had to have argued at some point because they were raising boys and children and life. Okay. But somehow they didn't. And so I think that because of that, the first time Denise and I argued, I didn't know how to argue well.
Didn't know what you were doing.
Didn't know how to make that work. Yeah. And so it took us a little while to kind of work through some of that.
We've known some families like that where like their parents never said a cross word. They never raised their voice to one another. But they'd go on quiet walks. And so at the end of the day, like the kids are like, they just don't know how to discuss civilly with one another or with their spouses. Like, how do you deal with that conflict? Yeah. So how did you figure that out? How'd that go?
Hammer and tong.
For who?
Hammer and anvil.
For who?
We took turn beating each other up for a while. Just trial and error. We used to laugh. We would tell people like, we dated for 4 years, almost 5 years before we got married. So we lived in different towns. Oh man, how old am I? We lived in different towns and we dated once a month.
Wow.
Because I was in college working a minimum wage job in a restaurant. She was in high school.
This is back when you had to pay for long distance charges.
It was, I would get off work at the hotel, at the restaurant, take my handful of quarters and a chair and sit at the payphone in the hallway down from the desk of the hotel and call Denise. And when the quarters ran out, you quit talking.
How many quarters are we talking?
I would do like $1.50 worth of quarters.
$1.50. What year was this?
75, 76.
Okay, so how much was $1.50 in 75? Due to inflation, I'm curious.
Well, I was making $2 an hour, so it was like almost an hour's worth of pay.
Yeah. And then how long do you get to talk for $1 and $1.50?
About 15 minutes.
Okay.
Yeah. We wrote a lot of letters. Every time the cost of postage went up, we're like, oh man.
Yeah.
It's going to cost more to write.
How was your penmanship given? Everything else was so proper, like your grammar. I
can write in cursive.
Yeah.
I'm one of those.
I can too, but it's not terribly pretty. $5.87. So yeah, so you were making like $7 an hour.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is that minimum wage?
Yeah. I remember when I remember on a job I had, a minimum wage went from $1.25 to $1.75. I remember thinking, how am I going to spend all that extra money? Isn't that weird?
I think we can all find a way to
The
spend money.
year that my college roommate and I were both dating a girl. We lived here in Nacogdoches. I was dating a girl in Kilgore. He was dating a girl in Ruston, Louisiana. We both worked midnight shift that started at midnight Sunday night. And so we would go spend a weekend at our girlfriends' homes with their parents or grandparents or whoever they were living with. And we would drive back in time to go to work Sunday night. So come Monday morning, we've been like up all day Sunday, worked all Sunday night.
It's hard.
And the joke that Reg and I used to always say is it got to where our phone bill was more than our rent. We decided it'd be cheaper to get married. Cheaper to get married than to keep living like that.
Those were the days.
Yeah. Fun days. Used to drive home in a car, no phone. If you broke down, you hitchhiked to the next house and called for help, that kind of stuff, So now when I leave my kids home now, they say, text me when you get home. I'm like, really?
Really?
Yeah. I've done this.
Yeah.
But I don't know. My dad would talk about when he was 16, a family from his church moved to Florida. And so he helped drive from Indiana to Florida, drove one of the trucks, and hitchhiked home from Florida at 16. I'm like, Dad, you won't let me hitchhike to Lufkin? He goes, yeah, well, it's simpler times then. So,
were they? Or have we just all changed?
I don't know.
Which was it? I don't know.
Something happened. I don't know that I'd have been brave enough to hitchhike halfway across the country, but but maybe.
But I mean,
I don't know if I had a 16-year-old.
But did you run around town and stuff like that?
Same thing.
On your bicycle and just
leave home. You leave home, you come home when it's dark.
Yeah.
Where you live now, I remember when those streets in Colonial Hills were being cut, and they were dirt.
Yeah.
And the outside loop the Colonial Hills got paved first, and we would ride our bikes down that big dip. And see, could we get off the ground when we hit that dip on the outside? Yeah, on 3-speed bikes with shorts and a tank top and
a helmet,
maybe shoes.
Did helmets even exist for bicycles back then?
That's bread basket on your head.
Something.
Yeah, but
our house was built in 71.
Yeah, we'd get home when it was Mom and Dad didn't know for sure where we were. Now, knowing how parent networks work, they probably knew exactly where we were.
I mean, they were.
but
you'll make it home. You'll survive. Kids are pretty durable.
Yeah.
Now all the kids have their phones and the location on, so the parents can see where they're at and everything at all times. I think it's more dangerous them having the phone than it is having tracking
probably
on it.
So.
Yeah, these phones are deadly.
It's the new thing that distracts you when you're driving. When I was driving, you had to quit changing the radio station, pay attention to the road.
I'm talking more about social media.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
All that stuff. Are your kids on social media, Ben?
Negative.
Good man.
Yeah. My kids are all y'all's age. So they are. But my grandchildren, can't stop them now.
You could try, but it won't work out very
well.
Still
don't listen today.
Yeah.
But it, I guess only one of my grandchildren is a teenager, and then there's a 17-year-old, and then there's a 7-year-old, 8-year-old. So there's a big gap. And so the littler ones, they play on Mom's phone, whatever the game is that they're playing at the time.
Yeah.
I have a 3-year-old grandson in Berlin, and when he was about a year and a half old, whenever Luke would sit down or Amanda would sit down and open up their laptop, he would crawl over and pull up at it and start smiling at the screen because he assumed they were Skyping with somebody. Because that was his understanding of what the computer was all the time, because whenever they would Skype with us or with the other grandparents and friends at home. So he's 3 now, so he's big enough to interact with us on the computer.
That's cool.
Which is kind of fun.
And also, given that distance too, you're able to see your grandkids.
Yeah, because my grandparents, we knew them through letters and pictures, that came in the mail, from other country. Well, even the ones from Indiana, we would see them once a year on vacation, but, we didn't really grow up around cousins or anything.
Yeah.
So I think that helped with our family too, as my brothers and I grew up here in Nac with Mom and Dad, so we didn't have cousins or aunts or grandparents around. I remember classmates of mine thought, I got to go to Grandma's house this weekend. I'm like, well, that must be nice.
I'd love to go to Grandma's house.
Grandma cooks for you, man.
Yeah.
You get what you want. We didn't really get what we want from our grandparents. That's also something we did that ruined your generation.
What's that?
We spoil your children.
We spoil your children. Yeah.
Yeah.
Ours aren't too bad. My parents aren't too bad about that. Neither are hers. Her parents are definitely very like, we're not going to do anything to screw up your kids. They're pretty good about that. My mom likes to hand out a lot of candy, especially at church. Not to my kids so much.
She has a reputation.
Everyone
at church,
else's kids
gets the candy.
Yeah, it's like, man,
where's Miss Judy?
Where's Miss Judy? She's a favorite.
Yeah, no doubt. Yeah, we did pretty good with that with ours, I think. Well, of course, 2 of them are overseas, but the oldest one lived with us for the first 7 years. He and his mom lived with us while she finished her college nursing and everything. And so it's different when they live with you all the time. You know, the thing with grandparenting is they come to your house, you spoil them, and then you send them home. Mm-hmm. We weren't sending him home
when those monsters are with you.
He was there every day. But it was fun because then his mom was working and saving money so she could go to nursing school. She had decided that she wanted to be a nurse. And I said, well, just live with us. We'll help take care of the baby, you know, save up your money because nursing school, 2 years is pretty much a full-time gig. You know, you can't really work while you're doing that very easily. And so he and I got where on Saturday morning we'd get up and we had taught him to ride a bike when he was about 3. We got a little balance bike for him. And so he and I would take our bikes and go downtown and ride in the parks. And, you know, so we spent Saturdays, you know, out exploring and punching holes in creeks and throwing rocks at birds and all the stuff.
Yeah.
So it was fun. But we still ride bikes with him a lot now. They live in Oklahoma now. And when he turned 10, I told him, you know, for Christmas, we can thank you, Ben. Appreciate that. I saw the question in your eyes.
Yeah. Good with coffee. I'm good.
When he was 10, I said, you know, I can buy you a present for Christmas, or we can go do something. And he said, like, what do you mean? I said, well, what if we took our bikes and we took a weekend and we just went and explored someplace? So he and Denise and I took our bikes to Galveston for 3 days for Christmas that year.
That's cool.
Rode on the beach and went and explored all the stuff in Galveston. Well, that's turned into an annual thing now. So we've done that six Christmases now. We've gone to different places. And we went to Waco and Shreveport and Fort Worth and different places where we could kind of go and explore things. Places that were good places to ride, but also had things you could do if the weather was just, you know, crapped out on you.
Yeah.
So that is one thing that we always did for our kids is to have more experiences versus physical presence and just go do something. Last year for my daughter's 15th birthday, we ended up going to Florida and went to stayed a couple days, went to the beach, went to a concert. And it just, she talks about that trip. Obviously it was only a year ago, but she talks about it quite a bit.
It's fun. It's fun to do. And it's been fun for us because as he's gotten older, we always ask every year, are you interested in doing this again? You have to kind of coordinate with when does he get a break from school, and you know, Christmas is obviously winter, so you have to kind of plan around weather events and things like that. But it's been a fun thing to do, and it makes our relationship with him different than with the other grandchildren. We do different things with them, so it's been fun to do.
Yeah.
But my parents kind of set that pattern too. My parents had 4 grandsons and 4 granddaughters, and they would take the grandsons for a week and the granddaughters for a week during the summer and do something with them. You know, sometimes they would do trips. Sometimes they would go to grandma's house, and, you know, the boys would work in the garden with dad and the girls would do stuff with mom, and which was always fun. But our kids have memories of doing things with their grandparents. And so we thought, well, that's a good habit to take across too.
My dad was 44 when he had me, and my mom was 42.
Wow.
Yeah. So both my sets of grandparents were a bit older. I think my mom's dad had passed away by the time I was 2. And then her mom lived to like 92. So I knew her fairly well. And then my parents up in Minnesota, Grandpa lived to 101.
Wow.
So he was around for a while. But we would go up to the family farm and hang out and do stuff when we lived in Minnesota. Then when we moved to Texas, we didn't go back much at all.
Yeah.
So we didn't have, especially in the teenage years, didn't have a lot of interaction with our grandparents. Yeah. So we do focus on making sure that our kids get to interact with their grandparents, because it's good to know where you came from. It's good to
it's good. It's a good thing. Yeah.
Honor your mother and father. I think that's a big part of it. Is, you know, keeping them exposed to those older generations.
I think
where the wisdom is.
Yeah, and yes. But I have good kids in spite of me raising them. So I think it's good. I think it helps with, we talk a lot at church about generational things, and we talk about bad generational things sometimes.
Generational curses.
Yeah, I'm not sure how far down that theological train I line up with it, with our church's view on it or people's view in general. But I do know that my grandmother, my dad's mom, told my dad that she prayed for her family for that the next 3 generations would all be believers. That was a normal part of her prayer life. So it'd be my dad, me, and then my children's generation.
Why'd she stop at 3?
I don't know. I don't know. Maybe she couldn't. I don't know.
I don't know.
She got to 3 though. I have a theory about it from a series of sermons Dad did one time. But my brothers are believers, and we're married to believers. All of our children's generation in our family, it's like all what would be my parents' grandchildren. They're all believers and are married to believers. And so we're like, so that's a good thing. So if the generational curse thing works, then the generational blessing thing also works.
Yes.
And so I feel very fortunate. Well, that puts a lot of burden on me because I'm in that second generation. So now, like, I'm praying for my kids in the generation after
picking up the mantle.
Like you have to keep passing that on.
Yeah.
Because if the generational curse thing is in fact a reality, and I don't doubt that it is.
I'm
kind of like my thing with generational curse is kind of like your definition of profanity, cursing, and swearing.
Okay.
So I have the same sort of thing with cursing thing there. For me, a cursing is a pretty
may you suffer from 1,000 flea bites.
Yeah,
that's a curse.
Yeah, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Now, can the actions of my forefathers affect my life? Yes. Denise and my best friend growing up, and then they got married 2 years before Denise and I did, and Denise and that wife were good friends. They were not able to have biological children of their own. And after years of going through that turmoil, they ended up adopting a couple children at the point of their birth. They were born to drug-addicted mothers, and both those children had things wrong because of how the drugs had affected their mom's pregnancies.
Yeah,
they had health issues, real health issues. And so certainly I can see some generational, things there.
Yeah. But I think the question there with the generational curses is it like a spiritual in the ether thing, or like the way we think about a curse supernaturally, or is it like a nurture nature thing where like your parent had their hangups, and so the way they raised you caused those hangups to transmit, and then down the line through the generations, those curses continue, like alcoholism, for example. And I know there's a genetic variable to alcoholism where like you can't handle addictive substances and you got to stay away from them. Whereas other people don't really have an issue.
It's probably the mixture of both. I tend to lean more to the nurture side, I guess, of it. Classmates, friends of mine, who were raised by abusive parents have tended to have abusive relationships with their spouses and children because that's what they learned, or they go the other direction from it. As my wife says, your past influences you, but it doesn't control you.
Yeah.
Okay. I grew up in the Leave It to Beaver family, right? My wife was the middle of 3 children whose parents were divorced when they were very young. Her father dabbled in the world of motorcycles and drugs, and to the point that it became a lifestyle that caused him to serve some time and ruined a lot of things for him. Her mother raised 3 children. She had 3 children in 30 months, and then was the sole parent by the time they were 4 and 5 years old.
Yeah.
When I met them as teenagers, her mom was working a 50 to 60 hour a week job, raising kids on her own. So Denise was like a latchkey kid, back in the day. and she says, she would tell when we worked with teenagers at church, she'd say, Mark and I come from opposite families. Mark grew up in church. I didn't. I was a latchkey middle kid, divorced parents, drug and alcoholism in the family. And yet I chose to not have that lifestyle because I gave my life to God.
Yeah.
And so now I can't tell looking at Denise, 50 years into a relationship with her, counting dating years. I can't tell bad effects in her from that, because when she committed to Christ, it completely changed her.
Yeah.
She took that verse about being a new creature serious.
Yeah. When you can break those curses, whether physical, spiritual, whatever, we're choosing to like take a different path, like you said. Yeah. So was she Christian when you guys met?
Yeah, we met at church youth camp, actually.
That's what you said. Yeah.
And so she was 14 when we met. And when she was 15, we started dating a little. She was in high school, so that was, you had to be kind of careful with that. But it was fun. She was part of a really good church with a good, strong youth group. It's one of the reasons we appreciate Maylee and what she does at church with our kids there. But the date night at the church, she went to church in Kilgore, and date night was Saturday night at church. The youth group gathered at church, and that was date night.
And they had their like dates?
And that was where your date was. And we played volleyball. We had hamburgers.
That's
and
stuff. A good idea. I've never heard of that.
Yeah, and it was, and often it was the pastor of the church rather than the youth leaders that were there, because he wanted to have a relationship with the kids in church too. They had a big youth group. They would often say to us, particularly the pastor, Brother Jim would say, I know where you all live, and when you leave here, I know about how long it should take you to get home. So if I call and check on you, you better be there. So he was teaching us an accountability and helping us as young hormone-driven teenagers, because Christian teenagers aren't immune to hormones.
No.
And so, but part of what we were being taught was you can have fun, but there are still boundaries. And so we learned a lot from that.
Stay chaste.
But it was kind of fun. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's good to stay chaste. I think it's
a good thing to be taught. So.
Yeah. No, it's such a serious thing with serious consequences that it just, and then the Bible puts so much importance around it.
But she had really good Bible teachers at that church, the youth leaders and the pastors, I have often said of Denise that she's one of the few people I know that became a believer and never doubted her faith after that point. Most of the rest of us at some point, you kind of, is this really?
I think you kind of have to when you grow up in it. Like when it's what you believe from day one. Like, I mean, I regularly ask the question, like, how long have you been a Christian? Which I haven't asked
all my life.
Exactly. I say the same thing. Like, I've just always been a Christian. There's no point where I've never not believed in Christ. I mean, there was a point when I got baptized when I was 7, because it's like, oh, let's get baptized. And then at 12, like I did like, sinner's prayer type thing. Yeah. But it's like, what does that even mean to a 12-year-old?
Right.
Like, what great sins have you committed? I know all have sinned and come short of the glory of God, but like we were good Christian kids. Like, what are you doing?
Just dusty, not dirty.
Yeah. I remember like some friends of ours, they like stole candy bar. They stole a pack of gum from Walmart, and it freaked me out. I'm like, you can't do that. You can't steal gum from Walmart. We need to go put that back, kind of thing. So that's how I grew up.
I remember at 9 years old, hearing a sermon, and a guy the guy was preaching gave his personal testimony, and I remember that in that sermon, not a hellfire and brimstone sermon, but kind of like you get two choices, heaven or hell. Make a choice here. I can remember praying the sinner's prayer, at that point. I don't remember when I was baptized, but I do remember where, and so I know I was a young teenager, at the time. But again, like I went to church all my life.
Yeah.
Wasn't a good kid. I didn't do much for the preacher's kid's reputation for a little while.
I didn't either.
I just wasn't that bad a kid, but I was just.
Yeah. What I say is I was the pastor's kid who never rebelled.
Yeah. Yeah. And I grew up in the late 60s and early 70s as a teenager, which was a rebellious time in our country for people that age. And so I was kind of grew my hair long and.
So were you a hippie?
Yeah. It was there was We were modified hippies because of that. I remember when my brothers and I got to where we could drive and had to schedule to take Dad's car on the weekend. I remember him saying to us, like, our name, Baublet, means something in this town. I worked hard to establish a reputation for that name, and you carry that name. So you will benefit from the hard work I've done to build a good reputation. Don't mess it up.
Yeah.
And so, we weren't, we cruised up and down North Street and through the Sonic, but we weren't bad kids, but we weren't perfect either. So.
Yeah.
But I can remember being upset when I realized that the local skating rink wouldn't allow black children in to skate.
Really?
Yeah.
When was this?
It's like in the late 60s and
late
60s and early 70s.
We're past...
Our high schools completely integrated my freshman year of high school, which was 69, 70.
You weren't integrated?
Now they were working integration into the school system before, but when my freshman year of high school was the first year there was a school, not two schools.
I mean, it is the South, but I was thinking, I guess Martin Luther King was 68 was when he was killed. But
the grocery store across the street from our house had separate doors and separate water fountains, for races and stuff like that, So that stuff I remember seeing growing up. I remember hearing my dad saw people. And so that's all we saw growing up was just people. And I can remember different times talking to Dad about it. I came home from school in 6th grade one time, and I had a rip in the back of my shirt. Clothes are expensive for a preacher's kid. And I remember thinking, I'm going to get in trouble because my shirt's torn. And, how can I sneak this by Mom, right? Like that could never possibly work. But when Dad asked me about it, I said, well, I was sitting at my desk at school in class, and I had an argument with a guy in the class. And he came and grabbed the front of the desk. It was, when you had the desk built into the chair thing, and grabbed the front of the desk and flipped me. Picked it up and flipped me over backwards. And so when I hit the desk behind me, it ripped my shirt and cut my skin there. And Dad said, well, what were you arguing with him about? I said, well, he called me a name, and I told him he was stupid. And he stood up and flipped my desk over. He said, well, what name did he call me? I said, I don't really know what it means. And he called me the name of your show. He called me the N-word and the word lover at the end of it.
Oh, okay.
I don't know what that meant, but it didn't sound like a compliment.
Yeah.
So I reacted to it and flipped me off. Well, what had happened was, after school, 2 days before, after school, there was a fight in the parking lot. And there was a white kid and a black kid got in a fight. Well, at our school, when you got in a fight, the next day in gym class, the coach put boxing gloves on you, and they thought he let you go a couple of rounds. If you're going to fight, I'm going to teach you how to.
Nice school,
right? So there's a fight after school. We had the boxing thing in school. I cheered for the kid that was in my class, who happened to be the black kid, but I didn't know the other kid, so I was cheering for my friend. And somebody in my class, named me. But I was like, I remember, so I was pretty sheltered, I guess. I didn't know what that word meant.
Yeah.
I probably could have figured it out from context, but
yeah.
But I was for it. But again, my dad was like, that's not how we treat people. Everybody's the same. The whole, my dad would quote
God is no respecter of persons.
No slave, no free.
Yeah.
Everybody's the same. My dad was got real involved in Cub Scout organization as we were growing up, and then the kids in our neighborhood and in our school were all in Scouts together. And so Dad he would invite the Scouts and their families to come to church with us, and there weren't a lot of integrated churches in Nacogdoches at the time. And so that was, kind of ruffled feathers a few times for people, but it's just like, so for my brothers and I, it was always sort of amusing to us that people would make a distinction because it just wasn't something we normally
wasn't a
thought
thing growing up.
Yeah, which was good. That was a good way to grow up.
Sure. Yeah. If more people could.
Yeah.
I mean, now we've kind of swung the other way where it's like you're bad if you don't see color.
Yeah.
That's
interesting.
Meritocracy. I'm all for meritocracy. Yeah. I mean, obviously in the realm of God is a respecter of all. Everyone has natural value as a human.
Mm-hmm.
But also, like, you treat people according to their accomplishments, their merit, and like what kind of person they are, whether they're a good person or a bad person. Character matters to me the most.
Yeah, and I think that Dad taught us a lot of that by the way he worked with the families we work with. There weren't very many holidays in our home where we didn't have people sitting at the table eating meals with us, and we had no idea who they were. Somebody Dad met, a family in the neighborhood, somebody picked up hitchhiking, stuff like that. My brothers and I all remember having people. Again, Nacogdoches was a dry county, no liquor sales.
I remember it wasn't
okay.
It wasn't wet until.
Yeah.
When did it become wet?
It was. I was in high school, so
it was Lufkin. I'm thinking of Lufkin.
Yeah.
So Angelina County was dry until like 2000 something.
But I remember when that whole election was coming through, there was Dad was concerned about it, and Dad told us, he said, it's not that I'm a teetotaler, but every time I've seen people drink, I've seen it lead to problems. And so the Bible, because it teaches you to be controlled.
Yeah. All things in moderation.
You practice control. There weren't very many, or my brothers and I can all remember times when someone would come and knock on the door of our house because they were looking for the preacher, because there was a problem at home because of drunkenness of some kind, And so Dad was often in our neighborhood on our side of town. Dad was a safe place for people to come when they needed help. So we had a lot of people sleep over because it wasn't safe at their house. And so that taught us to care for people. It also taught us, I think it was also part of the gratitude thing that we learned sitting at the table and saying thank you to Mom. We just be thankful for what we have. We don't have the situations that other people have. I remember my kids asking me about drinking as they became teenagers. I told them, I said, why don't you drink? I said, well, I don't drink primarily because I grew up down the street from a drunk family. Okay. So when you don't have liquor sales in your town, but you're an alcoholic, the family down the street would go to the grocery store and they would buy vanilla extract, which had a high alcohol content in it. And so they would get drunk on vanilla extract.
Doesn't sound pleasant at all.
No. It's an addiction is not right. Like the worst form of addiction is when you have a really bad addiction.
But you smell good.
But you could smell good.
Yeah.
But I could remember as a child hearing, like 2 houses down from us, hearing fights going on and knowing that's what. And then when the county sold more traditional forms of alcohol, in our neighborhood, we saw a lot of abuses in families because of that. And so that, in my mind, that kind of made me like, I'm not sure I want to do that.
Yeah.
Also, I discovered in junior high or so that I had discovered about myself that I have an easily addictive personality.
Okay.
If it takes most people 7 times to form a habit, I'm good at 3. I've got a habit. Okay. And so,
like in a good way and a bad way?
Good and bad.
Okay.
Yeah, I form habits easily. And I can read part of the education, drug, alcohol education was, you don't know if you start it, you don't know if you're going to be able to stop. Mm-hmm. That was also a time when they were starting to discover that alcoholism, you mentioned earlier, there's a genetic component to that for a lot of folks. That was not really well established at the time, but we knew that some people could start and put it down, some people couldn't.
Yeah.
Maybe I want to be careful about starting something I don't know for sure I can sit down, because I knew I didn't want it to be part of my permanent life.
Yeah.
So
a lot of people don't look at like the history of prohibition because you think like, why'd they outlaw alcohol? It was a bunch of prudes doing it. But if you actually go look at the 1870s to like 1910s or in that area, people were just wasted everywhere. They're like so many drunks, so many houses that were destroyed by it, like men abandoning their families. And like I know it was pushed by some nefarious stuff in the background as well. But man, like alcohol is the deadliest drug in history. Yeah. It just is.
Yeah. I told my kids, I said, I don't have a problem with people having a drink every now and then. There's a moderation thing I think needs to be controlled there. I said, there is a little bit of an image thing associated with it. I said, I told my kids, as a believer, and people know I'm a believer, if they think that believers don't drink and they see me out drunk, how is that going to affect my witness with them?
That's the stumbling block.
I said, so there's a, now while I can't live my life entirely by other people's opinion, and in fact, there are people who know me and are married to me that say I don't care at all about people's opinion, but of me. I said, but that matters, and so as a believer, I need to be.
I don't think it's opinion more as it is like going back to like honor your mother and father. You know that you carry their good name. The same thing with honoring God and honoring God's name is you carry His good name,
right?
And so it's not about you. It's about God and like the perception of Him that you as a believer carrying His name put out there.
Yeah, I remember hearing not very many years ago. I heard a guy speak at a conference. He was talking about how you deal with people in your business. And he was talking about customer relations and relationships with employees and things like that. And he said one of the things he always tried to carry in his mind in dealing with customers was the conversation I'm having with this customer. Can my next conversation with him be about, do you know Jesus? Or have I shut that conversation off by the way I treated this first conversation, which was always an interesting. It stuck in my brain. I thought that's a good way to think about that when you're having to deal with people. My job at the time was calling people who were past due on a debt.
Wow, okay. Fun.
Yeah, those you don't get invited to those Christmas parties.
This is for Fortran?
No, when I was at Elliott.
I gotcha. Okay.
To work with people on that sort of thing. And so those can sometimes not be fun conversations. But I remember thinking, okay, I need to make sure that in those conversations, I try to be careful. So when I would talk to my kids about drinking, I would tell them, you can't drink because you're underage. So legally, the state says you can't drink. So as a believer, you're required to abide by the laws of the land unless they violate God's law. And that doesn't violate God's law. I said, now, I can't have beer in the refrigerator. For me, I can't have beer in the refrigerator and then tell you and your friends that you shouldn't drink. To me, that would be it was right on the edge of a hypocritical line for me.
Okay.
So it was just easier not to have beer in the refrigerator because I don't need a beer.
Yeah.
Okay, now, I have a beer every now and then. Denise laughs at me. A couple of years ago, I said, I'm starting to get kind of worried about my beer drinking. She said, why? I said, well, I think I doubled my beer consumption last year. She said, well, what do you mean? She said, well, I think I had 3 last year, and the year before I only had 1.
Yeah.
So I'm worried. I'm worried. I'm
pushing it over the edge.
Pushing over the edge there. But
I think there's also 2 sides to that thing where like you kids are completely unexposed to alcohol consumption and seeing it like used properly, consumed properly, and then they go to college. And then college kids teach them how to drink.
Yeah, that's not healthy for
your
kids.
That's not healthy either.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, so we had that conversation a lot with our kids and their friends that came to the house, and we had the youth group at our house a lot when our kids were teenagers. And I tried to talk to them about that. Like, yes, some of them came from homes where there was alcohol abuse in them. And so we talk about what's the difference and how do you know and so I would try and say to them what my folks said to us is like, moderation is your key there. I would say to them, I said, if Denise and I drove to Lufkin for a meal and I had drinks with my meal, and then on the drive home, I was involved in a car wreck and hurt somebody. In my mind, would I wonder if maybe I'd have reacted a little bit faster? Because I understand the chemistry of how alcohol affects me.
Suffocation.
There's a little. It's gonna slow me down a little bit.
Yeah.
Maybe not enough to be perceptible.
No, it's literally suffocating your brain.
So
it's preventing the same amount of oxygen.
What if I hurt somebody? Then what I said, and so that doesn't make me never drink, but it always makes me be cautious about it.
Oh, and just don't drink and drive. Don't drink and then do things that are highly dangerous. Like driving, you're cruising down the road with a giant chunk of metal and glass that can just kill anyone. It gets in its way.
Not a good plan.
No.
So I'd say I'm not, mow the grass, go sit on the back porch and have a beer.
Yeah.
Okay. You're not going anywhere. Yeah. So I don't know. So again, but because I never developed a taste for, we've been beer several times. I enjoyed the bourbon podcast. Didn't have a clue what you guys were talking about. Not a clue.
Yeah.
Okay. But that's okay.
I mean, I think I didn't have a clue for part of it too. Like, Jonathan's quite quite well versed.
Well done.
And so is Kyle on bourbons. But I mean, it's not.
It was interesting. It was interesting to hear some of the history and and the variations and stuff of it. And again, okay, my well-rounded college education, the chemistry involved in making that process work.
Yeah,
that this process changes the way this flavor comes out.
Yeah,
that was intriguing to me how that worked. But
yeah. So how long have you been cycling?
Like most boys in East Texas, I rode a bike until I got a driver's license, and then I got a truck. This trip around, I guess in 2014, I started riding pretty regularly. I'd been, Jaden, our grandson, lived with us, and so I'd been riding a little bit with him as a youngster. But in 2014, my doctor said to me, you got two options. You can start taking medicine or you can work on your weight. I said, I'll take the weight option.
Okay.
And so I started riding a little bit more, mainly for health reasons. I'd get them ride before I went to work, stuff like that. But what I discovered was I enjoyed it. And then Denise got a bike and she started riding. And so she and I would ride together. We'd ride with our grandson together. And so we got to where we rode pretty well. 3 rides in, I was addicted.
I was going to ask.
Yeah. 3 rides in, I was addicted to where it's like, well, how far could I go?
Well, it's not the worst addiction.
So, about a year in, I would ride to, I would think like, I had a job where on Fridays we could wear blue jeans and t-shirts. So I thought I could ride to work and carry a change of clothes in my backpack. So I would ride to work on Fridays, then ride home. And so that kind of stretched my mileage out a little bit. And Denise and I would go when the kids moved out of the house. Denise and I we thought, well, let's keep riding. We'd ride in the evenings. We'd go on Saturdays and ride. And so it kind of turned into I got to the last year that I was working. I probably rode to work and home every day unless it rained.
Mm-hmm.
It was pretty much 4 or 5 days a week. And I would. My shift changed where I was working a 9:30 to 6:30 shift, and so I was missing peak traffic hours, which helped with road safety and things like that. But I just got to where I enjoyed it more and more, and that was kind of I sort of made when I retire, I could ride all I want.
Yeah,
so that was fun.
So what's the furthest? What's the furthest ride you've gone?
I rode 80 miles to Tyler one time.
Yeah,
to celebrate my 61st birthday, I rode to Tyler where one of our daughters lives. And so that was fun. So we had driven it several times. I didn't go up 69. I went up through Cushing and Troop, kind of the back roads up through there because the traffic was a little less. But I'd driven it a couple times and it kind of worked my mileage up to it. And so I set out one Saturday morning, and Jaden was still living with us, and so he and Denise left about an hour and a half after me, and he tracked me on Denise's phone. And I told him, I said, you track me and you bring water, and then whenever you catch up to me, I'll have you refill my water bottles.
It'll let you know if I fall over.
Yeah, you can find me. Yeah. If I'm not moving, come find me. So so I rode 80 miles. It's pretty much my longest ride. That's just my goal every year is kind of on my birthday, I do a birthday ride, and I ride 1 mile per year. It's kind of my goal.
Gotcha.
So, and usually roll a few extra just because you got to get home.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you got to get to 100 miles.
Yeah, got to get to. Yeah, I haven't got to 100 yet. That's kind of a goal out there. I want to try and get to. But,
well, I mean, also in age too. So when you get to 100 years old, you ride 100 miles.
Yeah.
Plus a couple more.
At some point, I may switch to kilometers. Or minutes. I read some stories of some guys, in the biking world and Facebook biking groups, stuff like that. Guys I read a while back an article in a paper about a guy who rode. There's a ride in England where you ride around the edge of England, and it's like a 4 or 5 day.
Sounds
trip,
like a blast.
Yes, and a guy was writing about his experience with that. He did that. He rode it to celebrate his 70th birthday. And his companion on his ride was his father, who also rode it. And I'm thinking, like, if you're 70, how old is your dad? His dad was 94.
That's pretty good.
Yeah. And of course, now they had ridden bicycles. He said, we've never owned a car. It's pretty much always been a bicycle.
Gotcha.
Thing. So that makes a difference too. But
keeps you in shape.
Yeah.
I mean, the best thing you can do is just keep your muscles.
We ride probably, weather permitting, rain. I won't go out and ride when it's raining, just for vision problems. And also, you can't see how deep the holes are on the road when they're full of water.
Yeah.
So you don't want to hit a big hole and not know it's there. But we'll ride. Denise gets off work in the evening, and I'll meet her at the courthouse, and we'll ride an hour and a half or 2 hours, 4 or 5 evenings a week. And then on Saturday, we'll do a 3 to 5 hour ride.
Wow.
So last year, this is my friends laughing at me like, all you do is talk about how much you ride. I think that's my hobby. You go fishing, you tell me how big your fish were, right?
Yeah.
Or how big the buck was.
Of course.
Last year, I rode a little over 4,600 miles for the year.
So you put some mileage on that bike.
And there was 1 month I didn't ride at all because the kids were in from Berlin. And so we spent time, working with them. I'd rather play with the grandkids than ride, So it's fun, but it's a nice, when I was working, especially, it's a nice relaxation from work.
Yeah.
My commute home let me blow my work out of my brain and be civil when I got home.
Especially when you're debt collecting for calls.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
do you geek out about the bikes and the equipment and all the stuff?
Yeah, not as much as a lot of people do. I have a nice bike. I have a bike. It would be considered a hybrid bike. It doesn't have it's not a road racing bike. It's got flat handlebars as opposed to the little curl downs.
Yeah.
I sit a little bit more upright. I don't sit completely upright. Denise does on her bike.
You're not skin tight clothing, leotards.
I've got bike shorts that I wear just because it's material that I sweat in the winter. So it's material that's conducive to heat control, which helps a little bit. I have shirts that have pockets on the back so that I can carry my wallet and a snack with me, stuff like that. But it's kind of a hybrid bike. It's flat bar. It's got gears because there's no place flat in Nacogdoches County.
Yeah.
So you can ride a little bit better. But and I bought a nice bike. The bike I've had this bike almost 3 years. The bike before that I had for 7 years. I put about 21,000 miles on it in 7 years. And but I bought a nice saddle, which is comfortable to sit on. I bought a bag to put on the back so I can carry stuff.
Yeah.
When I retired, I spent a little money. I bought a rack and a bag to put on the back of it because I would get up and I would pack a lunch and then I'd go ride. I'd leave the house about 9 o'clock and I'd ride for 4 or 5 hours, but I'd stop in the middle someplace and have lunch somewhere under. I've discovered a lot of old cemeteries in Nacogdoches County. And go down, you drive down the road, you see it's not like, Morale Cemetery pointing down a dirt road somewhere. Like, I'm going to go see what that is. Find some little old cemeteries and walk around and look at the tombstones and have lunch and then ride back. Yeah. So I carry bags so I can carry when the weather gets cold, I'll carry a change of clothes with me, or I'll start out with a jacket on and then it gets warm enough I don't need it. So that way I can spend some money on gear like that. So
yeah,
have a rain jacket I can wear when it gets rainy, that sort of stuff.
But you don't go overboard. You don't get extreme.
No.
Carbon fiber bike.
No.
Yeah.
It's an aluminum alloy bike. So it's it was the first expensive bike I bought, I guess 10 years ago now. When I test rode it at the bike shop, it was really nice. It was a comfortable size and everything. I kind of researched it online then. And geeked a little bit that way, comparing, which models did I want, stuff like that. And then, but I kept looking at the price of it, and I was like, man, it's like a car note.
They get expensive.
Yeah. And Denise goes, yeah, but how much fun are you going to have with it? How often are you going to use it? Well, that bike, like I said, I had a little over 7 years, and actually the frame cracked. I had a weld crack on it, and which made it not safe to ride. And then so then we do the math. Okay, so if I take the price of that bike plus the extra money I've spent on it for some gear that I added, I changed the saddle, I changed the handlebars and things like that. You see, if you take and you divide that out over 7 years, it's a pretty inexpensive hobby.
Yeah.
As opposed to buying a $50,000 bass boat. And,
on top of all the, the health benefits and all that, rather than.
And just fun. And Denise likes to ride too, she and I go ride together. And so it's something we enjoy together. I always tell people it's something we can do together, but because we ride single file, I'm not obligated to carry on a conversation. So it's like it's together time without the conversation.
Yeah.
So it works out good.
Who rides in front?
Turn left.
Who rides in front?
I typically will ride in front just because Denise doesn't like to lead. She doesn't like to make the choice where to ride.
Gotcha.
That's the real reason. What I usually tell people is that way, if there's somebody coming up behind us, I can hear when they get too close.
Oh.
That thump behind you, like, oh, I should stop and go back and get her.
Yeah.
But,
also, she gets the nice view, too.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. But, yeah, every now and then I'll trick her into riding in front of me, but it's always like, I can see her start after a couple blocks. I can see her start pulling over. So,
yeah, take over. Be the man, lead.
Yeah. I enjoy riding by myself. I ride a little longer by myself, but I enjoy riding with her because it's something we can do together, and it's good for both of us. Health-wise, it's good for both of us. What would we do if we weren't doing that? We'd be sitting at home watching TV, or well, actually, Denise doesn't even like to watch TV. We'd be sitting at home reading or something.
Yeah.
But which again, reading's not bad for you, but you don't get a lot of exercise flipping pages.
No.
So
I don't know. Back in the day, like reading was like social media and all that, where they're like, oh, the youth, they're just doing nothing but reading books.
Yeah.
There's some quotes like that from like the 1800s, 1700s. Yeah.
Yeah. When my kids were little, it was like, you shouldn't let them watch Sesame Street all the time. Because Sesame Street, it was a concern that the segments on Sesame Street were like 15 to 20 seconds. And what you're doing is you're teaching your child having no attention span is bad for them. They won't be able to concentrate in school.
Yeah.
They play video games all the time. Then they're going
to. And now they have TikTok and shorts and all that. And that does fry your attention span. My wife showed me a video today, a short, ironically, where a guy, it was a TED Talk, and he was breaking down, he basically showed your life in months rather than in years.
Mm-hmm.
And like, so each dot was a month. And it doesn't look like a lot of dots.
Yeah.
On this sheet. And so he broke down, like, you're going to spend X amount of these dots sleeping, X amount of these dots personal hygiene, X amount eating, X amount working and career, this, and then there's this leftover chunk of dots that's like, maybe a third, if that, of your life. It was from like 18 to 90. And then he said that right now, statistically, the average young person will spend 93% of that extra time staring at a screen.
Wow.
Yeah. And it's like, well, that's kind of a sobering thought. Like, one, just seeing the time left over, but also you're going to spend that much of it just doing nothing.
Mm-hmm.
But, well, I don't know if it was screened like entertainment-wise or screened for other purposes, but it seemed like he was entertaining just entertainment. And it's like,
you think, well, if you work on this all day,
that right there.
Like I worked on it in front of 2 computer screens at work.
That's probably weeks though. I don't think that's months. I think that's weeks.
Yeah, it's weeks.
Yeah, because there's a lot of them there. The months one's a little more sobering because it's like there's not a lot of those. Because a month doesn't seem like that. Like, oh, you got a lot of months to live.
Yeah.
But 12 times whatever.
Yeah.
It's less than you think.
10.
10. If we're lucky.
If you're lucky. I'm getting close to my 10.
Yeah?
Yeah. Yeah, I heard a preacher say the other day, he was talking about, if you related the decades of your life to days of the week, and you have 10, he said, so like you're born on Sunday, Monday's the next 10, Tuesday's the next 10. He said, I'm about halfway through Sunday.
Yeah.
And it's what preacher saying, he said, so I was starting to think about like, okay. He said, now I know all of you are sitting here thinking what, I know people that are older than 70 years old. He said, that's because sometimes God gives you a Monday holiday.
Yeah.
So you get a few extra on the end.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's interesting looking at a screen. You think if you look at a screen all day for work, and then you go home and look at a screen all day or all evening and that was my another good thing about the writing for me is I watched TV 3 times one time.
You think I'm getting addicted to this thing?
It's a series. Oh, the next installment's out. Well, yeah. So binge watching on computers now, like I can't do that. I have binge watched some of your podcasts.
Oh yeah,
yeah.
Binge listen or watch?
Yeah. I listened first, and then I discovered that there was a
video
of it. Like, oh, let's go see what they look like.
Well, I know you're one of our bigger fans. Like, we had a little like error in a podcast a few weeks ago, and you were the first people. There was a music error, and you were the first people who were like, hey, there's something going on here.
Yeah.
I know Kyle, he texted me, he's like, this is an interesting artistic choice, but I'm not sure I agree with it.
That's funny.
Mark, we discussed you like to read.
Mm-hmm.
what is your recommendation for anything new coming out last year?
I don't read a lot of new stuff like that.
Like, are you fiction or nonfiction?
I try to split it up a little bit and have I typically have one or two of each going at any given time. I read a lot of the nonfiction stuff I read now is stuff that Luke recommends to me, stuff that he's reading as part of his missions work. Because Luke's a team leader on their mission team in Germany, and so he's responsible for helping new missionaries that are coming in country kind of get acclimated to the culture, but also he's like the support pastor for the other missionaries. So they do a lot of reading on how to church, or different, not just how to evangelize, but how do we build a community? How do we, do that sort of thing?
So he's a missionary in Germany.
Yeah, in Germany, yeah. They've been there for 10 years now in Berlin.
Wow. Is that fairly accepted over there, or?
Berlin is like they refer to themselves as the atheist capital of Germany. It's just, it's a big city of Germany, probably of the world. But there's like I think it's like 1% of the people in Berlin identify as there might be a real God. And
among all religions, or just Christianity?
Yeah. And then 1%, the 1% recognize a Christian God, and some of that is just because my parents were Lutherans.
Yeah.
So that's the extent of their relationship with God. It's and so so being a he said you can easily talk to 1,000 people before you find somebody that has any concept of who Jesus is.
Wow.
Although they take off the Easter holiday and Christmas holiday and Martin Luther Reformation Day, the real Martin Luther, not the one we had. The original Martin Luther.
They were both real.
Yeah, they were both real. Yeah.
Yeah.
The different generational Martin.
The OG Luther.
Yeah. So they celebrate those holidays, but they don't celebrate them as religious holidays. They're just cultural holidays.
Bank holidays.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But he'll read books on mission work. He recommended a book to us several years ago that I've read a couple times, and it's for so you're I think the title is something like "So You're the Parent of a Missionary" or something like that. But it's about how do you as an adult deal with your adult children going somewhere, and how are you supportive of them? But it's the two ladies who wrote the book kind of collected stories from other missionary parents, about things their kids had gone through and how they dealt with what happens when your kids move across the world and you don't hear from them. Our kids went to Germany where you have internet. They could have gone to the Amazon, where they don't. So
there's tougher places to go.
Different places like that.
I'm not saying it's not tough, but I'm just saying that you could be, like you said, in the Amazon in a mud hut.
And there's an airport in their town. And not in ours, but I can drive to Dallas and fly.
We have an airport.
So I read. So my nonfiction stuff typically tends to be stuff that Luke has recommended, or Tara will mention a book, or somebody will mention a book at church, and that sounds interesting.
Any good ones?
Fictions. The book I'm reading right now that Luke recommended to me is it's called Pray Like a Monk, Live Like a Fool.
Okay,
I think is the name of it. It's like songs. I know all the lyrics and none of the song names, but yeah, that's it. And it's and so he reads a lot about prayer and life, living the life, and so those are always good for me to read. And I'm always about 3 books behind him, so by the time I get to the book, he's on to the next one.
Yeah. So what's this book about?
It's pretty much about how prayer works and why we pray, and it's it's not a lot of, as I've read it so far, I'm only about 2 chapters into it. It's not new material, but it's rearranged. It's like the book that we did with the men's study for February, that Men We Need. Like, as I read through that book, it's like, there wasn't anything new there. It's just rearranged differently. I mean, the same basic truths and different examples, different stories to go with it, but still good to read. You know, it's a good reminder.
Yeah.
You know, of like,
it's like saying please and thank you.
I sort of like need to be the man, you know?
Yeah.
Fiction.
That's why you got to ride in front.
Mm-hmm.
Be the man.
Ride in front.
Yeah.
So people can hear. Sometimes we pass people and they'll say, occasionally, there's a place we ride here in town where Denise will get ahead of me and we'll pass an older couple. The irony of me calling people older, I appreciate. Okay. We pass this older couple and he will often say to me, she's ahead of you. I was going like, she's younger. So that's why. But, so fiction books, I like to read, I like science fiction that is more science than fantasy. Crichton? Yeah, I like Michael Crichton. Old school stuff, Asimov, Heinlein, Arthur Clarke. I got a couple of collections of H.G. Wells, science fiction stuff.
You like Lovecraft?
I'm not real crazy about it, but I've read some of it.
So the existential dread.
Yeah. I worked my way through the Dune series for about 5 or 6 novels, and then it just kind of got.
Yeah, 6 by 5 and 6, Chapter House and Heretics. You're kind of like, and then it doesn't. It's not ending too.
Yeah,
in a kind of meaningful way.
Yeah,
I think you get to God Emperor, and then you're pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
Those 4 are pretty solid.
Yeah, so I enjoyed his, and I've read other books that he's written as well. which was interesting. The Ender Game series, the books. I enjoyed working through this, but it's kind of like finish this thing. I'm good about 6 or 7 books in, and then but now the difference is in the Asimov world universe, he ends up tying a lot of his stories together with the robot series and stuff like that. So that was kind of neat to see him kind of wrap some of that stuff up.
He was a big time atheist.
Yeah. Yeah.
He's definitely
was. But I enjoyed the style of his writing, and I enjoyed the all human universe.
All human
universe. Like all the worlds are manned by humans. There aren't like other species, other insect worlds and reptilian worlds.
There's no aliens.
Yeah. It's just the human world is expanded.
Well, he was all about robots.
Yeah. So he
was very well thought out and logical in a lot of his ideas. He definitely did a lot of internal building to get that. And
it was interesting to some, there's the development of civilization. Each world was, while they were human, they had their own unique.
You're talking about that's Foundation?
Yeah, the Foundation series,
which they have a TV series now on that.
Yeah.
They made a TV series.
I've heard that. Yeah, I haven't seen it yet.
A lot of people ask, how are you gonna?
Is it good?
Oh yeah.
It's like adapting that's really difficult because it just spans thousands of years and it doesn't carry with single characters. Like
that would be tough.
But I've heard they did a pretty good job making it work.
Mm-hmm.
Good old Apple, right?
Yep.
So you accept Apple's TVs, but not their physical products.
I don't pay for it.
Well, how do you get it?
That's the best Apple when you don't have to pay for it, right?
Right. Well, yeah.
So I like that. I have probably 55 to 60 paperback copies of Louis L'Amour novels, Westerns. Okay.
So, good old Westerns.
Good old Westerns. People would come to my house and they're like, my most recent supervisor at work was an English literature major, and I mentioned to her one time reading Louis L'Amour, and she's like trash novels. Like, no, okay, it's not highbrow. Okay,
it's Pulp Fiction.
This is Pulp Fiction. Yeah. Okay,
Western
but they were fun little stories. Okay, and I started reading those as a teenager. Okay, so they were like fun stories to read. My mom took us to the city library during the summer. We had to check out books every week to read because we weren't going to be dumb little East Texas rednecks when we grew up. We were going to learn to read stories and I read those and those stories and the Asimov stories. You know this better than me, probably as a writer. Like there's like 5 plot lines, and you just you put different characters in the plot lines.
Yeah,
the good guy, the bad guy.
How do you mean like structures?
Yeah,
structures?
like there's boy meets girl. I used to laugh.
There's different archetypes.
Yeah,
There's four structures.
In a romance novel, the boy and girl that hate each other in the first chapter get married in the last chapter. There's
there's the archetypes. There's four structures. It's a win, stop, escape, retrieve. Every single story made will fit into those four stories somehow.
And that's what I used to tell people when they say, "Oh, you read science fiction? Oh, you're one of those." I'm like, "Oh, it's
one of those.
It's one of those." Yeah, it's a story that develops. Now, some of them are, some of the fantasy stuff I'm not real crazy about.
Yeah, Crichton was my favorite author. By bringing him up, Jurassic Park's my favorite movie. Although I do think the movie's better than the book. Yeah, considerably so.
There are Denise and I have worked. Denise is also a very prodigious reader, and so she and I have tried to find books that we both enjoy, and occasionally she'll like a book and I'll read it and go like, no, I'll finish that book because it's hard for me to. I'm committed now. Like I'm 3 chapters in, I'm in the habit, so I got to finish the book.
Yeah, I'm the same way when I start something.
But I'm not going to read that one again. But we found several authors that we like, and we actually worked to try and find Christian authors that wrote Christian books that weren't comic books. I want a book with a story, with characters, with plot.
Comic book? How do you mean comic?
They're not like they weren't like books for dummies. I've read some Christian authors that were just
kind of like Christian cinema, where they're preaching to the choir.
Yeah, I don't want a Hallmark movie.
Yeah,
okay. I want a book with plot. I'd like to find a Christian version of Grisham.
Okay.
Well, I like Grisham's novels because I
now when you say Christian, how do you mean Christian?
Okay. I don't mind weeding out the cursing in a book, the profanity in a book. Okay. But I like a story that there's an author we read. Her name is Terry Blackstock. She was an author and became a believer and got convicted about the fact that her books weren't doing anything to promote her faith.
Okay.
So her books now typically, as a type, there's a story, and one of the characters is a believer, and something happens in the story that puts their faith in conflict with what they're doing. There's a lawyer who has to defend a guy that's guilty, but he's a Christian, and so his faith and the crime he's defending this guy for are in opposition.
Okay.
Or there's a she wrote a series of there was another author, the name just left. It's a series of there were 7 foster kids in an orphanage, and they sort of adopted each other as a family, and then they became believers. When they processed out of the orphanage, one of them became a lifeguard, one of them's an EMT, one of them's a lawyer, one of them's a doctor, one of them's in the Air Force. So each child has an adult story relating to the other kids, but about half the kids become believers. And so then in the process of the story, they're witnessing for their faith to their unbelieving. And so there's a presentation of the gospel through the story. It's almost like you read the story and go like, oh, wait, this was about how to be a believer. And so we've enjoyed reading some of those books that are like that. And because the story's good.
Well, the trick is to not be propagandistic.
Yes.
Where you place the message that you're trying to say over the story itself.
Yeah.
So you'll compromise the events of the story or the characters in order to force your way.
Yeah. That's I want a good story. I want a story that's going to captivate me. I want a story where I'm going to work to figure it out before I get to the last chapter. I'm okay with Deus Ex Machina, but I'd like to get there first.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. I want to give me enough clues in the story I can figure out who the bad guy really is. And if along the way, you
learn a lesson.
I learned something. One of the characters. I'll one of the stories I read recently, one of the books I read recently, was a police rescue team. One of the guys was a K-9 officer, and one of them they were searching for lost children. And so the K-9 officer would talk about, I'm praying that we'll find this child. And people say, what do you mean you're praying? And so then in the book, she gives her testimony as part of, but it's not, let's take a break and do the 4 spiritual laws. It's just works into the conversation story. So that's what I think of when I think of a Christian book, a Christian author.
Have you ever heard of James Scott Bell?
Say the name again.
James Scott Bell.
John Grisham of Christian Suspense.
No.
Might be somebody to look into.
Check him down.
Yeah,
check
him
out.
Check it out. James Scott Bell. The John Grisham of Christian Suspense.
Huh.
He leans more with regards to, like Grisham, more the legal thrillers, suspenseful stories. So that might be something you check out.
Yeah, we definitely will look that up. Denise has one of the couples that were friends of ours back in the Oak Grove days. One of the ladies, one of the elders' wives, she and Denise got to be good friends, and they were both readers, and so they would trade authors. And so, everybody knows a different set of authors.
Yeah.
And so you kind of trade information back and forth. A lot of the Christian books that I read or by Christian authors are kind of like Terrell talked the book of Esther. You go through the whole book of Esther, and God's not mentioned by name, although God is definitely a part of that story. So sometimes some of those books are that way. It's not overtly Christian.
Yeah.
But through the process of it, you see, God working through people's lives.
My goal in writing is just presenting a godly worldview.
Mm-hmm.
So like good, stories with a godly worldview where you can see it in the background, you can see the structure, even if your characters are bad or if they're evil or whatever you want to call it. The moral of the universe, the way the story wraps up and ends, it's going to like promote more godly morals, even though God may never be mentioned by name. It's not because. My opinion, the big problem with Christian storytelling, I mean, I haven't read a lot of Christian novels, so I can't speak to that, but I've seen enough Christian movies, Christian cinema, the roll your eye kind of stuff. The problem is every plot is wrapped up in the conflict that you have is that you don't have God, and the solution is to get God, and everything will be fine. And life is full of a lot more conflict and problems than that, and you can't have a story without conflict, and they try to eschew and stay away from like the dirty side of things or the difficult side of things, and just like let characters be characters, let humans be humans. Again, it comes back to that propaganda thing where like you placing the propaganda, the message over the story you're telling. And some people say like every movie we make is a sermon, and it's like, okay, well, I mean, what you're doing is you're writing a better sermon than you are a movie,
right?
And it has its place. Like, I'm not saying those things haven't had success and haven't reached people, but like they're not for me.
Yeah. And I think even in the genres, in the reading in the visual genres for Christians, I can appreciate sometimes that people are making an effort, but I just can't quite get there. Who are the two brothers that did like the?
It's the Irwin brothers and the Kendrick brothers.
Yeah, the Kendrick brothers is who I was thinking of. Like I've watched several of their movies, and now from a technical standpoint, I don't know how they would be evaluated by you guys that are in the business. A couple of them, the stores are pretty good, but it was kind of like, I can see a progression from their earlier ones. They got better at the story and the filmmaking. As a consumer, it seemed like they were getting better.
Yeah, I mean,
which it would be fair to say everybody's going to get better at their craft. So those were kind of interesting to watch and enjoyed it. And some of them had some little character things that went along with it. But I don't know. I won't say names of movies. I've seen some movies that weren't supposed to be Christian movies, but like you were just describing, they have a good moral character to it. Horrible with names. The movie about the football player that got adopted.
Oh, Blind Spot.
Yes. I wouldn't say that's an overtly Christian movie, but there's sort of a, here's a problem. A family took somebody in, helped them.
Yeah.
So that's, okay, that's a good way to behave and live your life.
They contain Western morals, and Western morals come from Christianity.
Yeah.
It's kind of hard to get away from that.
Yeah. There's a lot of history there. Yeah. So, were the founders of our country all Christians?
I don't know. I'm pretty sure they were. Like they all.
I mean, all. Now you start defining the word Christian. Like some of them define themselves. Some of them would call themselves deist, maybe, as opposed to what we. So the problem is like how we define Christian.
Define Christian
in 2100.
Define Christian for me.
Yeah, like a person who dedicates their life to the goals and the lifestyle that Christ had, follows the teachings of Christ, would be a Christian to me. Were the founders of our country all Christians? I don't know, did they all go say a sinner's prayer one day and get baptized? I don't know.
Well, that's
but
not.
they all grew up reading the Bible. They
thing.
all quoted the Bible.
Here's the thing: sinner's prayer is not in the Bible.
That's right. That's exactly right.
Yeah. I mean, it does say you have to profess his name and follow him, but like,
there's this guy on the cross that never got baptized or joined the church.
Theoretically,
he made it. Theoretically,
my dad thinks that he was Well, my dad also believes there's 5 crosses, which I kind of lean toward. I think there's 5 crosses too. The reason is because when you read through all 4 Gospels, there are 2 thieves and 2 malefactors mentioned, and which kind of mean 2 different things.
Yeah.
And then there's the order in which the malefactors and the thieves were put up doesn't actually match up across the Gospels. And so if you want it all to be correct, if all 4 Gospels to be correct, there's got to be 5 people up there.
Yeah.
Anyway, aside from that, Dad's like theory conjecture is that the malefactor, because it never says one of the thieves was professed. It was just the malefactor. That he was probably one of the guys who was following Jesus around, and the disciples had been whatever he had been, a malefactor, and then got caught and put up on the cross. That's his theory.
Could be.
Don't know.
Who knows? Yeah. One day, if it matters, we could ask.
Yeah, but I do lean toward like I think that if somebody's on their deathbed and gets saved, well, again, whatever that means, I don't think that having been dunked in water is going to be one of the requirements.
Right.
Because also, if you look at the scriptures, there's 7 baptisms listed, and not there's only one of them that's water.
Yeah.
There's like baptism by fire, baptism of the Spirit. There's baptism of water. So
like the founders of the country, we know that the Bible was often the book that most kids learned to read in school. It was obviously a part, and so that moral standard was part of common law in England. It was part of Locke and Blackwell and all those guys. Some of those it kind of carried into that, and so that is a part of our culture.
I think that it was so common it went without saying.
Yeah,
like finding an atheist in that era would be really, really hard.
Yeah.
So it's like it's like writing about air. Like, would we need to talk about air everywhere we go? Like, we all know it's here. We all know we breathe it. It goes without saying that it's there.
If you wrap them in chains and put them in a water trough and they float, then they're an atheist.
Yeah.
Oh,
it's a duck.
It's a duck.
A duck.
Yeah. It's interesting sometimes is another thing my dad encouraged us to do. I remember, I can speak from my relationship with him. I don't know about the boys, the other two. But I can remember asking him things about faith. How do you know that what you're believing is real? And he encouraged me to explore church history, not just our church, but churches across. Kind of how did this denomination get started? What makes it different? I can remember going to my dad as I was 10, 11, saying, "Okay, I have a question. I know you, and I know that you're called of God to preach, and you read the Bible and you study and say, this is what this verse means. This is what this chapter is about. Here's what this means. My best friend goes to this church. Her dad is a pastor. He's called of God, reads the same Bible, and teaches something that's entirely different than you out of the same passage. I don't understand that." And he said to me, he said, "Would you read the passage? Tell me what you think it means." I'm 11 years old, okay? I'm smarter than everybody else by that time.
Of course.
Right? You got an 11-year-old.
Oh, yeah. No, they know everything.
Yeah.
Hey, my 5-year-old is like, you tell her something, she's like, I know that.
Yeah. So, but then say, okay, he said, I'm not saying that guy's wrong and I'm right, or he's right and I'm wrong. What I'm saying is God gave us this book to help us understand how to be what he wants us to be. And we're going to have differences of opinion on some of that stuff. He said, probably both of us are a little right and a little wrong. He said, so the trick is, and that's where I first learned the whole agree on the important things and disagree on the minors.
Yeah, exactly.
Without him ever saying that, that's what he was teaching me. But that's what I can remember, and I appreciated that. He would use the verse, study to show yourself approved.
Yep.
He said, study what you believe, find out why you believe. He said, our church believes this is how we interpret this set of passages. Okay. Other churches place more importance on different things. Okay. We probably all have a bit of the truth. We're probably all going to get to heaven one day and God's going to go like, you guys.
Yeah.
Look, it was so obvious. How did you miss this?
or the pieces weren't there, because I think a lot of things,
it's not a comprehensive, but it's written. There's a quote I heard somebody say that the Bible is written for us, not to us. It's to help us, but it wasn't designed to us.
Yeah.
The letters that Paul wrote were to address specific things, and we all benefit from
them.
Because we're all going to have problems with immorality in church, and do I eat meat offered to idols, and what do I do with my slave when he becomes a believer?
What do you do with your slave when he becomes a believer?
You accept him according to Philemon.
I'm saying you. How many slaves you got?
How many slaves I got?
Yeah,
I freed all my slaves.
You freed them all. Oh, good for you.
Yeah,
good.
Yeah. One of them lives in Germany. One of them lives in Tyler. Those were my early version of remote controls. Get them. Go change the channel.
Yeah, back when you had a clicker by then.
Yeah.
Click. Yeah, but like you notice, like with most of those theological differences in churches, it's not about, like you said, the majors. It's like it's about what we believe about God, not about how we conduct ourselves.
And sometimes even one of my good friends from the Oak Grove days would say that to me. I said, yeah, but the problem is that we agree on these 5 or 6 big majors, and then we say the rest are minors. But I said, but there's a few of them in there that I think are minors that you think are majors. And so those are the ones where we end up with doing lots of arguments and splitting, what color carpet, church split kind of thing.
Yeah, that's a major. Yeah. What color carpet?
But I said, but again, does this argument make a difference in my relationship to God or not? And if I believe something, there are things that I believe in firmly now that when I was a teenager and in my 20s, I had a different opinion on what that scripture meant or how to apply it to my life.
Yeah.
But I think that that's sort of the way we're supposed to do that. I think that in the Bible, we see some of that. I think that the disciples, I think there's evidence that they grew in their faith during that 3-year period.
Nobody's suddenly a perfect Christian, if you can even be a perfect Christian. That's not something that you attain overnight. The Bible says, be perfect as your Father in heaven is perfect. So it's like, I lean toward, like, if Jesus gave you a command to do something, it's got to be attainable.
Yeah.
But it is a journey and a path. Peter was with Jesus for 3 years, and then he denied him and went through his rigmarole.
And then years later, Paul said, hey, Peter, this thing about eating at that table instead of this table, you're creating a problem here. Just be careful. And so Peter and Paul had a little back and forth about, how do we eat with the Gentiles or eat with the Jews and stuff like that? Okay. So I'm like, okay, by this point in y'all's life, you should have figured this out. But they were still processing through the process as well.
My question always is, how does this make me a better Christian?
Yeah.
So it's like whether I believe this thing about God, like take predestination. Like if I believe that God pre-planned everything that's happening in my life, or if I believe that I have free will to go about and I have agency, does that make me better either way? Like my actions at the end of the day are still going to be the same, whichever one I believe in. Now, I do think that if, it does have a fundamental effect on how you view God when you believe you have agency or you have no agency. So I do put that in kind of like, maybe not quite minor. I'd put it a little closer to major, but it's still not something that I'm not going to disassociate or not be around people over something like that.
Yeah, I have friends that they view their Christian life as walking on a tightrope. And I view my Christian life as being a kite on the end of a string.
Okay.
Like God's holding one end of this string, but he's letting me, I get a little room to work, but I'm still tied to the center. And so I have a little license there. I have a little choice in some of these things.
Yeah.
If I'd have joined the military out of high school, like a lot of my buddies did, there's a chance I'd have never met Denise, which means I'd have never married Denise, never had my children, never did, so there's some choice involved in that.
Yeah.
I guess I view the Christian life now, being a kite on the string gives me more liberty to practice my faith in God, but I'm still tied to the fundamental of God. Walking on the tightrope to me is much more restrictive. That's, if you mess up and you say one curse word, right before the car hits you, you curse and you go to hell.
Yeah.
Like I can't do that tightrope.
Well,
I'm willing to give God the ability to judge me.
Well, and one is
that was
protected,
to give
like
God the ability.
Yeah.
Sorry, God.
But one is protective. Like I like the analogy on the kite screen, because you're God's keeping you on the path. He's protecting you from going too far astray while you're wandering. Whereas the other one is like, hellfire and brimstone. Make one mistake and you're out, buddy.
Yeah, that's pretty tough. But I don't know. I think there were probably periods in human history where that hellfire and brimstone was an effective way to give the gospel to people.
Yeah, maybe.
But then there's a point where that's no longer, and I don't know where that definition came from.
Yeah.
The differences came from that. I mean, you've lived under a lot of different pastors, besides just Dad. And so each one has a slightly different, the way they handle the word and stuff like that. But I guess one of the things that whole, I'm responsible for my relationship with God.
Yeah.
No matter who my teacher is, no matter who my pastor is, no matter who I'm listening to, I'm still ultimately responsible. And it's back to the choices have consequences things, which is, I guess one of my fundamental beliefs, is just,
I'd say it's more than a belief. It's a truism.
Yeah.
It's just a fact of life.
There's a real truism there.
Yeah.
I had a random thought run through there. I was thinking about coming to talk to you, I was thinking that, when I was growing up, besides the habit forming thing, and one of the things I discovered is that I view life as basically funny. Like I never met a straight line I couldn't make a joke with, annoys people sometimes, but
spice of life.
There it is. But I also, most of my good friends that I made in school, I made in 7th grade. And there's a group of us that became friends there that are friends to this day still. Not long after I got out of high school. No, let's see. They were probably all graduated from college. I was in the process of deciding how to handle college. But one of those good friends sent me a cartoon one time. She had gotten married, moved away, and she emailed me, or she mailed me this cartoon. And across the top of it, she wrote, "I saw this in a local paper and it made me think of you." And there was a guy carrying a picket sign, and the picket sign said, "Don't succumb to reason." And then in her letter, she goes, "When I saw this, I thought of you because I remember all the way through high school, you would argue about everything until we finally agreed with you, and then you would change sides." And
what were you after the argument, or were you after?
I think I was after the argument, or I don't know, see how persuasive I could be. I don't know. Maybe I was just a jerk. I don't know. But I think that some of that was just try and figure out, what do I really believe?
Yeah.
And again, I'd credit a lot of that to, I think the reason that in my adult life as a Christian, going through some good things and some bad things, I wasn't as shaken by the bad things I think I would have been if I hadn't argued out my faith in my mind going through it. Like, I've had a really good life. Okay. I've had some problems that God sustained me through. But when I look at my problems and I look at other people's lives, I'm going like, yeah, that's been a pretty rosy road. And I thank God for that, because that means He's protected me from some things. If I'd have had some of the problems that friends of mine have had that I've seen in them, I'm not sure I'd have made it. I'm not sure I'd have made it with my faith if I hadn't had that strong faith in God, that knowing that He was going to take care of me. Yeah. And so I'm thankful for that. We raised 3 kids. Denise and I had a marriage, or have a marriage. We had a marriage that was really good.
Yeah, maybe not after this podcast.
We had a marriage. I told her, I said, maybe you should come and sit in a corner and you can make notes on what needs to edit out. But, we had a really good marriage for a lot of years. We had a marriage that was kind of rocky for a few years.
Like you said, it was 41 out of
41 out of 44.
Yeah.
Now we have a marriage that's really good.
Yeah.
And we rarely disagree, but when we disagree, we can figure out how to make it. How do we make this work?
Yeah.
How do we, we've ironed out all the big issues finally. So now we're just down to the little, what color drapes.
Yeah. The binders, the carpet.
the little stuff.
Yeah.
But those I think you have to go through those things. You have to be willing. It took me a long time to get to where I realized that I needed to ask for help in my marriage. Because back when we were talking about arguing and knowing how to argue, we had a marriage counselor that we saw for a while, and a couple of things that he said to me that stuck with me was one of he said to me, he looked at me one time, he said, "Okay, would you rather be right or be married?" Okay, okay, and he probably wasn't the originator of that phrase, but that stuck in my mind because I think, okay, that's a good point. Which is more important to me? I firmly believe God put Denise in my life so we would be married.
Yeah.
We prayed about it. We prayed about it. We prayed about it. We prayed about it. Other people prayed about it with us. We were sure God intended us to be married. So at the point where things got really rocky and we're thinking like, maybe we made a mistake. No, we're sure. We got those stones in the middle of the river to show us where we crossed.
Yeah.
Okay. And so I like those stories in the Bible where they did that.
Yeah.
Because here's the point where God saved us.
Yeah.
And so when we worked through those hard times and got past them, now we can look back and go like, if we can get through that, we can get through anything. Now we're at a point in our life where we're thinking about, the next 20 years, got 20 years left. Hope so.
Yeah.
Okay. The next period, whatever that time is, there are going to be issues that come up in our life now because we've seen our parents go through these ages, and biology is biology, things wear out.
Yep.
And so
the frame cracks.
Yeah, the frame cracks. It's not as easy to replace this frame.
Yeah.
I told somebody asked me the other day about Denise. I said, yeah, I've got a 1960 model, still got all the original parts. Okay. So it's been good so far.
Yeah.
But I think I sometimes, I guess that's one of the things that makes me want to talk to people about having a right relationship with God, is because I don't know how I would have survived without it. And as believers, we see people go through crisis and think like, how could they deal with that if they weren't believers?
Yeah.
So,
all right.
But hey, good parents will love God and loved me and prayed for me and taught me to read the Word and study God. Made that part of my life, made that part of my children's life. My kids grew up to be believers, and which is good. And every day is a good, fun adventure, and what happens next, we'll see.
Yeah,
I read the end of the book. We win, right? So,
exactly. So. God wins.
We have just kept being so busy looking stuff up over there.
Know. All right. Well, I think that's a good place to end it.
I enjoyed it.
Yeah, I enjoyed it too. It was a blast. Thanks for coming in.
Enjoyed it. It's a lot of fun. Ben just kept nagging at me until I got here.
Yeah. He does that sometimes.
Well, we'd love to have you back sometime.
Definitely.
He planted a good seed there. I've enjoyed it.
All right.
All right. Have a good evening.
You too.
Bye-bye.
You enjoying your Android over there?
Yeah. Actually, I want to get the new trifold.
That's Huawei.
I know. I'm trying to figure out how I can hack the back-end Chinese software so it doesn't spy on me and get one over here and free it up. But that's a conversation for another time.
Who do you prefer spies on you, the Koreans or the Chinese or the Americans?
Well, if you believe that everything you're doing is probably written in the book of life anyway, yeah. At the when it comes to Judgment Day, it's not really going to matter with regards to who's spying on who. So I don't really. They're all spying on each other. They're all spying on us. Yeah,
it's all spying.
It's all spies.
Google knows all.
Probably.
Yeah.
Probably. Dude, what an episode.
Yeah, it's great.
What a great episode.
It's good conversation.
Just a wealth of knowledge. Love having Mark on. Would love to have him back anytime. Really interesting. To kind of get a little bit of history from this local area too, right?
Definitely. No, I do wonder because we've been here for like 25 years, but being here since 64, you said?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like Nacogdoches.
Making
changed a little bit.
Making $1.50.
$1.50. Spending $2. It's $2.
Still, wow.
Spending half of it to call your love.
When pennies and nickels and dimes actually meant something.
Yeah, we might be getting rid of at least one of those soon.
Yeah. He scratched on it a little bit, but his kiddos are missionaries in Germany. Did you know that?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I just wanted to kind of shout them out because I've heard about their mission work a couple years back, and just really, I got to meet them when they came stateside for a little bit, and it's really kind of awesome what they're doing, and the presentation that he did was just really, I don't know, it just kind of really spoke to me. So Luke and Amanda Baublet, right? They can be found at Greater Europe Mission. Guys, go check them out. gemission.org. Just type in Luke and Amanda Baublet. We'll go ahead and put it in the description so people can check them out there and just help them out financially. Missionaries like that, they really, really rely on local support. So if we can, trickle anything towards them, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, check it out.
But
where can we be found?
We can be found on YouTube. Definitely check us out anywhere that podcast can, where you can get your podcast. On Spotify now, right? We got video on Spotify. So on Spotify, it's a 5-star ranking system. We would love some 5 stars. We would love some thumbs up, right? That's what we're trying to get is, right, some thumbs up. Hey, if you listen to the episode, give it a thumbs up and then share it, right? Share it amongst your peers, your friends. Check us out on socials. We got Facebook, we got Twitter, we got Instagram.
Pump that algorithm.
Pump it. Pump it up.
All right.
See ya.